either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And today we are covering one of our most favorite movies.
Yes.
And why did we whisper in the intro?
Because they whisper in the movie.
Very much so.
A lot of whispering, actually.
Yeah, they feel it in the water.
And they smell it in the earth?
I
Taste
guess.
it in the earth? I don't know. Is she licking the dirt?
Someone looks dirt at one point in this movie. I guarantee it. We are finally covering, as we mentioned in our very start to this series, in our Spotlight episode, we are doing Peter Jackson's adaptation of The Lord of the Rings.
And we are going to start, of course, at the beginning. Not The Hobbit, but with Fellowship of the Rings, Part 1.
Exactly. And just because, I mean, this movie for us was probably one of our defining movies growing up.
Oh, yeah. This was a pillar in... Not, like, even if you weren't into movies, this movie, marked something in just culture.
In cinema altogether, too. Like, it was a big change. I don't think we'd really seen an epic planned out on this scale in a long time.
No, and this was one of the few movies that when it hit, it didn't just make waves and then, years later, different countries or places suddenly were on board with it, kind of like how anime does. When this hit, the entire world was like, yes, all hail Lord of the Rings, we are all nerds now.
Yep.
Everyone simultaneously was in this movie,
except for my buddy Micah, who has only seen the third Hobbit movie.
Okay. I can understand. But yeah, it was one of those things where you had to try not to at least know who Frodo Baggins was.
Yeah.
You had to really put in the effort to not know who Gandalf was.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And so, I mean, we're in this review, I just kind of want to put a little bit of a framework on this.
Yes.
Just because we know very much so that there is so much to this.
We've spent a lot of months debating about what we can fit into this.
Yes. And this series is going to focus more so on the design work.
Yes.
We're going to try and leave out as much, I have some parts where I'm going to add lore and just things that help clarify, especially for the casual viewer.
Yeah, and like all good Lord of the Rings fans, there are a handful of times where we are legally required to tell you that so-and-so broke their toe kicking helmets and things like that. It's required. It's just how it has to be. I'm sorry. I know you already know. Don't care. I'm telling you anyway. Yeah,
and I do apologize if we miss anything that you absolutely love or have to, or wish we had put in.
Yeah.
There's just so much to this franchise that I was looking at it there's hundreds of hours of just watching and listening to commentary and
that's without all of the books that have come out that are not just fan-made books, but books that were let out by the art directors, by the screenplay writers. There is almost as much lore around specifically the movies for this as there is originally from Tolkien.
Exactly. And so, getting into it, for those who don't know, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring is, of course, the 2001 adaptation of Tolkien's famous novels.
Yes.
It is about a young hobbit named Frodo who is sent on a perilous journey to save the world, basically.
Yeah, and it is, at its core, the most fundamentally, basic and grounding blocks of fantasy of all time.
Yeah.
Not just from Tolkien's work, which did lay a huge groundwork, which we talked about in our short.
For modern fantasy, I would say.
Definitely. But when the movie got brought into the idea, this isn't the first time someone's tried to make this. But this is the first time someone who was a giant fucking nerd said, I can do it better.
Exactly. And so, the screenplay was written by Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Bowens.
Yes.
Or Boyens.
I like Boyens.
They call her Philippa or Philippa.
I think Philippa?
Philippa.
Okay.
Sorry.
I watch a lot of subtitles, so I have no idea how to pronounce most people's names.
But it was directed by Peter Jackson, and like
Yes.
many of the movies, it is star-studded. It's a star-studded cast, which we'll introduce as we meet them.
Yeah.
And I do apologize if we miss anyone. The cast and crew is so big, we're just going to mainly focus on the main ones.
Which, again, you could go on forever about who's worked on this movie, not just in front of the camera, but from behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the list of people who worked on costuming for this is gigantic. The people who worked on the art directive, like, of course, we've got our main, like, managers and headers of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But sound, music, this sucker goes on forever.
Yeah, no, exactly. And Peter Jackson did almost all he did the main directing.
Yes.
There was 3 crews, so of course he can't be everywhere filming everything.
No, because, I mean, this movie took forever to make by film standards.
Mm-hmm.
And to make that work, they have to overlap, and it still took forever.
Exactly. And we did cover a good chunk of the start of that.
Yes.
And the one interesting aspect I kind of want to bring up before we really start to get into everything is that England doesn't really have a united mythology or origin story like many other nations.
No,
and so,
it's got its classics, but you could argue that those are modern in a way.
Yeah, especially like the Arthurian tales are the main ones we think of, which are more contemporary than a lot of country origin stories.
Oh, yeah. There's not a whole lot of, like, creationist stories.
Yeah, and part of this is due to Viking invasion and a bunch of other outside history and the Romans. And
it's hard to be the original people of England when everyone is the original people of England.
Yeah, exactly. And so I do want to talk about a little bit about the book.
Yes.
Just
because you can't not.
Exactly. And we didn't really cover any of the book stuff in the history of movie adaptations. But the origins of the book came from Stanley Edwin, who had encouraged Tolkien to write a sequel to The Hobbit.
Yes.
And in that, Tolkien originally started off writing and rewriting. And the issue with adapting The Lord of the Rings is that there's 3 books.
There is. They're chunky books.
And as we've talked about in the past, everyone's tried to condense it down into 1 or 2 movies.
Yep.
To varying degrees.
Varying degrees of success.
But originally Tolkien had written this book as one solid book.
Yes. And that's part of what makes it hard, too, is because, especially if you've read the books, you know that there's not, like, a good stopping spot.
No.
Like, even if you were going to, like, just do the 2 halves of the story, the middle's messy.
Yeah. No, exactly. And we'll get into that when we get into the 2 towers. Because there was a lot of talk on that, and a lot of the Fellowship is by far the most to the book.
Yes, which is saying something, because even after all these years, people still bitch about how their favorite part of the book isn't in the movie.
Yes.
There's a reason for that, because otherwise this already gigantically long movie would be too long.
Exactly, and that's the thing I'll tell everyone right now. If you want a full adaptation, line for line, you are full of shit. The Counts of Elrond in the audiobook is an hour long. It's over an hour.
Yes.
Do you guys want to sit and watch a fictional meeting for an hour?
And I know the idea of watching Merry and Sam run naked through the fields is hilarious. You don't actually want that. Don't lie to yourself.
There's people who would love to see Sean Astin and Elijah Wood running naked through the fields. That's different
than Sam and Pippin.
Well, Sean Astin, Sam, yeah.
Yeah, because of immediately after Sean got done playing Sam, like, to the point of, like, they still had some backfilling to do, he went and lost a ton of weight.
Yeah.
Like, the next day was like, nope, I am done being chunky for Sam.
I don't blame him.
I don't either. Well, he worked so hard before to have a pretty well-built physique.
Yeah.
And he put his all into playing Sam, and Sam is a chunky hobbit.
Yep. And, again, like we said, we're not going to compare the book to the movie. We here like to more so treat them as separate entities.
Yes,
as much as we can.
Yeah, especially as book nerds, because I love these books. I read them about once a year. I listen to the audiobooks all the time. I have them currently hanging from my ears.
I was just
as
about
tiny
to
earrings.
say those are very cute earrings.
Thank you. And this isn't the only book series that I absolutely love. There's tons of book series that I love that have been changed into movies. And every time I try to compare them, I am always disappointed.
Yeah.
But if I separate them 9 times out of 10, I am, in fact, happy. With one exception. Hate you, Aragon. You were still garbage.
We'll do that someday.
Oh, man.
So as well, we are reviewing the extended edition. So if you don't remember a scene or two, it might be because they weren't in the theatrical cut.
No, but at this point, to be fair, if you haven't seen The Lord of the Rings, just go watch the extended version.
Yeah.
Like, it's at this point incredibly easy to get a hold of.
It's only about 30 minutes or so longer than the originals, so...
Yeah, and honestly, the scenes that were cut, no, they're not terribly important. You weren't missing a whole lot.
No.
But they do add a lot of fun.
Yeah, and also with the runtime of just under 3 hours, just over 3 hours, you can also remove the credits, which are about 30 minutes of the runtime.
The very length of credits.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than most movies coming out today.
No, and honestly, as everyone knows, if you're going to be marathoning these, which that's how you watch them, you're going to have yourself some bathroom breaks. You'll be all right.
Mm-hmm. And before we dive in, I would, like to thank whoever decided to basically turn the filming of the movie into a documentary.
Yes.
And release it all at once. You guys are godsends. That is where a good chunk of my resources came from for this movie, as most people.
Yes.
But as well, I do want to put my other sources out there, because I have used quite a few sources in putting this all together.
Yeah.
One, the Atlas of Middle Earth revised edition by Karen Wynne Fonstad. The Complete Tolkien Companion by J.E.A. Tyler.
Love that one.
Tolkien's World from A to Z, The Complete Guide to Middle-earth by Robert Frost, Robert Foster, as well as the YouTube channels that supplied a good chunk of the lore and just my general back knowledge. Nerd of the Rings, The Broken Sword, and Men of the West.
Yes. Immensely helpful.
Yes. And supplementary info where I had a little bit of time finding stuff, and I took it with a grain of salt. The One Wiki to Rule Them All. I do also want to note that I do own the David Day books, which I purchased before doing any real digging because they looked pretty and nice.
Yes, they do look very nice.
I'm aware that his work is often non-factual based analysis and more interpretive. I did not utilize any of them for the episode, but I do want it to be known that I do have them and am aware.
And I would like to thank quite heavily the extended edition DVD set.
Yes.
I watched that sucker endlessly when it came out, and my dear husband didn't believe me until I could almost quote the commentary.
Poor Brian.
If any of this interests you and you feel like we missed something, those are some excellent resources to go through. They go into so much more detail than we could ever. Yes.
And for the architectural bits, I use Traditional Building of Britain, An Introduction to Vernacular Architecture by R.W. Brunskill. Mm-hmm. Building Across Time by Michael Fazio, Maria Moffett, and Lawrence Wodehouse. 6,000 Years of Housing by Norbert Schonauer. Mm-hmm. A New Art Nouveau Being, Paris Style 1900 by Gabriel P. Weisberg.
We need to have a talk with architecture people about how we name our books. These are boring.
Yes, yeah, I apologize. These are pretty boring names.
I mean, it's on par.
Yeah. A Field Guide to American Houses by Virginia Savage McAllister. Mm-hmm. And A History of Furniture, A Global View by Mark Hinchman.
You're welcome. Welcome to the furniture world.
Yes, these are all academic books. I apologize. They're not as riveting as The Lord of the Rings.
And mothers, notice we are using our degrees.
Yes. And to be fair, in my opinion, the Lord of the Rings books are a bit dry.
Okay. Yes. Partially because, A, there's too much to not be dry and, condense it into something readable. Mm-hmm. And also, much like anything that is so deep in its own history that it has multiple iterations and people who study it full time.
Yeah, there are Tolkien historians.
There are Tolkien historians who,
you big nerds.
giant nerds, but also, like, how is this your full-time job? But also, I get it. We could not get through it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive. I mean, it's crazy to see how much...
If you feel like digging, it is never-ending. Mm-hmm. And there is actually answers for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, this is... Honestly, Lord of the Rings is probably the reason I have, like, lore and history books on, like, Final Fantasy, The Legend of Zelda, like, all of this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And,
definitely.
I mean, we probably have the Silmarillion to thank for all that, too.
Definitely. Yeah. Tolkien started the idea of the rabbit hole of the universe, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And so, enough with the boring nerd talk.
Yes.
In adapting the movies, Jackson said that starting writing was the most important part, was translating the work. And not just translating it word for word, it's translating the themes.
Which, especially since from the get-go, he didn't try to do this solo hand. Mm-hmm. I think was probably the best decision anyone has made of any interpretation so far. Exactly.
And the core theme they found, and that's the thing about these movies, is they are always Frodo-centered. At least the first one. The first movie is all about Frodo's story.
Yes.
But it's about finding hope in hopelessness, which sounds hallmarky, inspiring, basic bitch pudding above their workstation.
It is nerdy basic bitch pudding, though.
Yeah. But I do like his approach, because as a filmmaker, you always come from a background and you have a history, which at the time, Jackson's history was genre horror films.
Yes, it was.
With his big breakout role being Brain Dead, or as we know, Evil Dead.
Yes.
Which, fantastic gore fest. I love that movie.
It's very good. Nothing like this movie.
No. But he tried to keep that out of the film and let the work do its own thing.
Yes.
And through that, they were constantly writing and rewriting, editing, and doing all this while shooting. Some people got revised scripts, like,
literally the day of,
as they were about to start filming. Yeah.
Yes. Which is part of the reason why when people hold this movie up on a pedestal, it's more than just Peter Jackson's work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times where we compliment a movie for picking actors who are unknown. This is one of the few times where I'm going to really compliment that they picked very experienced actors, because I don't think a lot of people could have just been handed a script, reading it off their lap, and it would have made the final cut.
Yes and no.
Yes.
In some regards, there are some very experienced actors. Others are fresh.
Yes.
But it was nice.
Yes.
They were perfect for the roles. In regards to Tolkien's writings and adapting them, the issue with it is he is very descriptive in many regards.
Yes.
And then in many others, he was ambiguous to the end, or was changing stuff.
Yeah. It was a living work, which was part of the fun of it. Exactly.
And one specific thing I think of is the Balrogs.
Yes.
In the early writings, there was mentions of potentially hundreds of Balrogs.
Yes.
And then by the end of his career, he was referencing maybe there were 6 or 8 of them total.
Yeah, it was very much that he was discovering Lord of the Rings along with people.
Yeah.
But part of the, interestingness of the Tolkien legacy is that people, even though he does, change... he changes his world.
Yeah.
Everyone accepts and, lets that be his final thing, be what it is, as opposed to being he changed his mind here and there, so it could have been.
Yeah.
Most people agree that, he changed it, but now this is it.
Exactly. And also, to credit for their writing and their narrowing down of the story, they removed the bits that didn't advance Frodo's story, and so or Frodo's story past carrying the ring to Mordor.
Yeah, because you have to remember that when this came out, they knew they wanted to do 3 films. They really didn't think they were going to do a whole lot past that, though.
Yeah.
They were no, this is a huge undertaking. We're going to kind of, keep it here.
Yeah, and Jackson's mentioned that there is much more footage and material than has been released ever. And he's talked about, a 25-year edition.
Which would be really cool, and I think there's room for it. But also, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, the extended edition that came out when it did was something that we had never gotten before.
No. And even with Criterion still being a thing around that time, like, we didn't really have, like, the absolute massive extent that is the Fellowship of the Rings. And to give people perspective who don't know, there are 2 bonus features. This is a 4-disc set.
It is.
There are 2 bonus feature discs of appendices, each ranging about 2 to 3 hours apiece.
Yep.
And then on top of that, each movie comes with 4 commentaries.
Yes.
4 separate commentaries. One from Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyer. The production crew, the post effects, like so the special effects, the editors, and the production staff.
Yep.
And then the acting.
Yes.
Or actors. Yeah. And so also in regards to the adapting of the story, they had to rearrange some plot points and change dialogue flow to create a better narrative.
Yeah, and as a lot of people have pointed out, we got rid of some characters and replaced them with others just so we wouldn't have to, like, introduce somebody to then be like, and ignore that person forever.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, that's very true. I mean, I can think of specifically in the books, the Hobbits don't meet Arwen.
Yeah.
Right away. They meet another elf.
Yeah.
And Arwen's not even in the book. She's mentioned once in the book, but her and Aragorn's stories all in an appendices.
Yeah. Which in the book world is fine because you're so busy reading about every color of every blade of grass on Middle Earth that you don't really have time for her.
Yeah.
But in the movie, like, she is kind of a crucial role. Yeah. Especially by the end.
And and the reason they brought her in is because she's important to Aragorn's story, who is arguably the second main character. Well, sorry, third main character. Frodo's the main, Sam's second. Sam is almost the main character.
I like to think Sam is the main character only because I get tired of Frodo's bitching real quick.
Yeah, so Aragorn's like that. We have about three real main characters that we have true growth.
Yes.
And of course you can say the same with Gimli and Legolas, but they wasn't as heavily focused until after the movies came out and everyone started digging into them. Same with Merry and Pippin and
and
the entire Fellowship is a character.
They really are.
Yeah. But also I just want to say how much, I know we've harped on this a bit, but there was so much love and care that went into these movies. The cast and crew all poured over all the small details and their props and their performances.
Yes.
And there's just no way to cleanly sift through all of that in a presentable way for this format. So, and if you are interested, I highly recommend going out, finding the extendeds again. I know they've been re-released on Blu-ray, not as cool as the original DVD releases.
No, those are much cooler.
But it is still worth going through.
Yes.
Especially if you love this franchise. But speaking of that detail, the building of the sets, part of what made why they were able to do something so well is because they had so much lead time. They were actually able to start building the props and the sets before the script was even finished.
Yes. And
also because Tolkien's descriptive in certain regards, as well as they used the artwork that was done by Alan Lee and John Howe, who both had both been doing illustrations for Lord of the Rings for decades at this point.
Yes. So it was interesting too because, and this is something we're seeing question rise again with the teasing of the new Lord of the Rings TV show, is the art direction of it. And when the art direction for the Fellowship came out, I don't remember a single person questioning it.
No.
You saw the dwarfs design and you were like, yes, angles, geometry, stone, perfect. You saw the elves design in Art Noir and the flowing, the almost organic nature of them, and you're like, yep, exactly it.
Art Nouveau.
That's it. You saw the Hobbits design and you went, that is exactly what I imagined as a child.
Well, and so here's the thing. So my background for Lord of the Rings, this was actually really my introduction to fantasy.
Oh yeah.
Because beforehand, I'd been into medieval artifacts and stuff because I was living in Germany at the time when these movies were coming out, so my reference was medieval castles and
sure,
not so much the lore or the mythology, but just living in that kind of environment.
The imagery.
Yeah, and it's weird looking at it back, like, now, 20 plus years, how much of an influence that really was and changed my perspective in viewing a lot of things in the world of, like, my first Renaissance, I'm using quotation marks.
Yes.
My first medieval fair was in a ruined castle.
Yes.
That changes how you see other things down the line, definitely.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah. And speaking of that imagery, I mean, Alan Lee and John Howe were both actually brought on to do concept artwork and continued redevelopment and refining of their previous works. Alan Lee had mentioned that he had been brought on, and it was supposed to be like a 6 month to a year time frame.
Yeah.
And he ended up staying on the whole production.
Yeah, and it ended up working out really well because later on, John Howe was able to focus more on the armor design, which worked out really well because that's what he had been an expert in for years.
Yeah.
And so he was able to really pour detail into the armor, which there's now whole books of all of the sketches that they went through and all the iterations of not just basic designs and like concepts, but like down to like, okay, this type of person needs this weapon and this is how they would use it.
If you owned all these books, you'd have a very nice Lord of the Rings library right now.
Yes.
And also Jackson chose these two because it was their artwork that was most influential in what he wanted of the world. And he also wanted, and here's the biggest thing of why I'm more interested in the design and the influences of Lord of the Rings architecture and just the world in general, is because Jackson wanted to have a feeling of a forgotten history and not a Hollywood fantasy.
Which is something he was almost like new to that concept with.
Yeah.
Because I had loved fantasy well before this had come through, but all fantasy up until this point felt fake. Like, you knew you were watching fantasy. You were like, oh, wouldn't it be so cool if dragons were real? All right, back to my normal thing. This came out, and everyone was like, that is real somewhere on this planet. New Zealand, that's what New Zealand looks like, damn it.
It felt very Ren Fairy.
It did. To an extent of, like, you were not just, like, enjoying the world. You were sucked in and fully believed it.
And this is why anything pre-90s wouldn't have been as successful.
No.
It would have been something of its time. And as we've seen with some of them do have places in our hearts, like the animated versions. Lots of people, that is something that they hold dear. Yeah.
Do not lie to yourself. Those are ugly as shit.
Yes, they are. Very much so. But they are also of their time, and it's nice to look back.
And, like, they had a style. Like, I definitely, like, enjoy the art style for the version of The Hobbit that came out. I have a book where they redrew it in that style. It's very cute. It's very, like, fairy tale-y, but it feels fake.
Yeah. And, I mean, speaking of its influence, I mean, I'm currently playing the new Pokemon Arceus game. That's been, unfortunately, distracting me from some of the work I should be doing.
Shh, it's fine.
But in that game also has its own kind of forgotten history. There's ruins.
One of the smartest plays Pokemon has done in a long time.
Exactly. And, I mean, it's even ancienter than the main games that we were thinking of.
Yes.
And so, I mean, it's interesting to see. And I feel Lord of the Rings was that first step into that forgotten history and richening of fantasy.
And what we'll go into more as we continue, but it wasn't just the desire to make it this level of detail and rich and then, like, having some part trickle off later, which unfortunately happens quite a lot, either with time crunch, not getting who you want to play, fill in blank here.
Yeah. Money
crunch, having giant corporations put their grubby fingers in things. This is one of the few movies where none of that was a problem.
Yeah. I think as they said it was the largest budget indie movie ever made.
Yes.
And I'll get into that in just a quick second here, because as for the architecture, the weapons, armor, clothing, we'll talk about them as they come up, but they were commissioned by Weta Workshop, which Weta was brand new at the time. Peter Jackson was
he was fairly new,
relatively new director coming off of The Frighteners.
Yes,
but it's all based on realism and alternate history, and the story of Weta is very much also the story of Peter Jackson.
Yeah, they
all had their indie backgrounds. They started working together. And they were given this opportunity, and when they were asked, like, hey, what Peter Jackson normally would come to them and, hey, I want you to do this project for me. This time he went to them and he said, what part of the project do you want?
Yes.
And what is sitting there. And it was a big risk for them as well, because they were a very small studio at the time.
And this was a huge production from the get-go.
They said they were just sitting there and thinking of like, well, they've seen in the past where stuff doesn't turn out as well because you have so many creative minds butting heads. There's not the cohesion. So they're like, we'll take on pretty much everything.
Which ended up being the smartest thing they've ever seen.
Exactly. I mean, look at them now. They
are leading their industry.
They've probably been in, what, a third of the movies we talked about for the special effects?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've done a lot.
They really have.
Or at least they've had their fingers in parts here and there.
Yes.
So, of note, the armor was done by Stu Johnson and Warren Green, who had been making armor in the traditional method. And they'd been doing it for local fairs and organizations beforehand. Which
is part of the reason why everything in this movie feels and looks like it has proper weight.
Especially the close-ups.
Yes.
And Peter Lyon made the swords from his reenactment scene in the New Zealand days, or in New Zealand before Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Which I think is interesting because there's parts where they talk about, like, New Zealand doesn't have this kind of history, but they all still do, like, the whole medieval...
Yes. They embraced this movie as much as Peter Jackson did.
Yeah, and I can just understand, like, me coming from the medieval nerdy phase as well, that there's some allure and romanticization of this era.
100%, but that's part of the fun.
Exactly. So, before we really get into the movie, what are we drinking today, Chris?
We have a delightful cold ale.
Yes. Prost.
Prost. As I spill it on myself. Delicious.
Yeah. And, I mean, even before then, I mean, honestly, I know we had mentioned that we were going to go into, like, all the production up until the creation, but once New Line took over, Peter Jackson was pretty much allowed to do what he wants. The studio would try and have it say, but...
They didn't really.
No.
Also, it helped a lot that pretty much the entirety of the movie was... accomplished in New Zealand, far, far away from the grubby fingers of Hollywood.
Yes, exactly. And so, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, Part 1. We open with the prologue and the forging of the rings as we set the world.
This is something that I think for a lot of people who watched this movie stood out, was the opening for this, because... especially if you had come in already knowing the story from the old versions of the movies.
Yeah. Or
had, like, been a reader of the books. You knew from the get-go that there was a lot of prologue that somehow had to be crammed into this.
Yeah, and I think because it's very much in the same vein of Star Wars.
Yes.
Of, like, in a galaxy long, long ago, far, far away, without being too... what's the term?
Windy?
Too windy, but not as static.
Yes.
Because even though the scrolling is cool, don't get me wrong.
It looks cool. I cannot read it.
It's very much... it's the show, don't tell.
Yes. I also like...
or it's really a combination of the two.
Yes. And part of the reason why I think the Lord of the Rings opening... sets itself aside from, because like the Star Wars one, yes, it definitely has a special place, but part of that is because it's part of Lord of the Ring, or Star Wars, sorry, and not necessarily like an innovation in storytelling.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason the opening to Fellowship felt so much different is from the get-go, we were given the lore up front in a visual context.
Yes.
With a historical lens already put on it.
Yeah, and because doesn't she mention off that it's a story about things forgotten that should not be that should not have fallen away?
Yes, and if you're gonna be picky, that's your own fault. You were there, damn it.
Yeah, no, exactly. It is her own damn fault.
It is her own damn fault. But the other thing that's really useful here is that we physically see what the old elves look like, what the old dwarves looked like, and like how those have changed when we get to the like actual like meeting.
Not dwarves, men, because it was the last alliance of elves and men.
Well, yes, during the war, but when everyone's handed their rings, the dwarves are given rings.
You're talking about that. Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Like, you physically get to see a quick overview of the entirety of everyone in this world.
Yeah, without getting into, like, the nitpicky detail of...
who likes who and why we all hate each other and, cursed tree-hugging elves.
The sea elves, the dark elves, the wood elves, the northwood elves, the southwood elves.
Yeah.
There's so many elves.
There's a lot of freaking elves. But not in this movie, there's not.
There's 2.
There's 2.
Yeah.
There's kind of 3 if you count Legolas as his own race of elf.
Kind of.
His father does.
Yeah. But also, this, just from the beginning, it sets the design aesthetic and the level of craft and detail.
Yes.
Because we get the introduction to Isildur.
Yeah.
And we also get, like, the banners, the elfish armor.
Yes.
And the the Gondorian armor.
And all of it, this is the part that always blows my mind, because it would have been easy to take those designs and then just kind of immediately put them onto the current world people. Yeah. But instead, you immediately notice that, like, the design themes are the same, but they've all been updated.
Yes.
Nobody's wearing the exact same stuff anymore, which is brilliant.
Exactly. And on top of that, technologically,
yes,
this was a massive...
this was amazing. I still am blown away.
They had this AI that they could just program of, like, hey, I want this orc to act this way, I want this elf to act this way. And so that way, everything wasn't coordinated, it wasn't planned. The computer just ran the simulation and just...
Yes. I think the program was called Massive.
Yeah.
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 And it changed the battle sequences from feeling like a copy and paste sort of situation to, when this came out, people legitimately had a hard time believing that most of the humans on the screen were CGI.
Yeah.
And a lot of us fully believe that they had gotten thousands of people to act.
And it's still good. That's the thing. You
still have a hard time telling.
Yeah, there are some parts, especially in the very first movie, where some of the effects aren't as refined. But that's what's interesting about this entire franchise, is that not only is it a story of, not only is it a great story, but it's also a story of Weta and Peter Jackson's works of just...
And you physically can see the improvements.
Yeah, the refinement of the computer effects, and the refinement of the acting, the story, everything.
The fighting.
All the way through.
Yes. And the jump, which is weird to say because when you're watching them all together, you do not necessarily see the advance, but from the first movie to the last movie, there is improvement.
Yes, especially from the very beginning. Like, there's... And not necessarily the practical effects, because they're still good, but you can tell that they were still trying to figure stuff out.
Yes.
Specifically, I can think when Frodo jumps from the hill to Gandalf. Not bad, but rewatching it and knowing
how they did it, yes,
it's lost some of it. It's aged a little bit.
And then a scene, just a few scenes further down, where we're using practical effects again to get that height difference between Gandalf and Frodo. Can't tell at all.
Yeah,
it has aged completely seamlessly.
Exactly. But also, this prologue almost wasn't.
Yes.
This actually came because New Line insisted there be one. So Peter Jackson just said, well, you know what? If I have to do an opening, it's going to be balls to the wall.
Which ended up being kind of his slogan for this whole movie.
Yeah. And the prologue was written in 4 pages and used as just an introduction to everything.
Yeah. And honestly, yes, it's a lot. It is a lot to go through. I don't mind it.
No.
It's one of the few times where, like, a random backflash at the beginning to set the world makes sense.
Well, and on top of that, it also sets up the darkness that's to come instead of just immediately plopping in.
Yes.
About hobbits.
Yes, because that was something that, from the very beginning, Peter Jackson was worried about. Because how do you make a movie where your main bad guy is a floating demon eye stuck on a tower?
Yeah, which nowadays is menacing.
Yes, but not originally.
No.
Originally, like, that would have been laughable.
Yeah. Well, yeah, laughable, but it's also kind of... it's common in a lot of RPGs to have floating, like, elemental enemies and whatnot.
Yes, but I would argue that the majority of America, before this movie, not into RPGs.
Yeah, no.
This movie kind of, like, led people into allowing themselves into fantasy.
Yeah, for me, this is also about the same time I was introduced to Final Fantasy, so...
Which... arguably has a lot of odd character designs.
Exactly. So, I mean, there's little ties here and there that we can start to see. But also special effects wise, I really like the ring shrinking.
I do too. It looks so good.
And it's such a nice little way to give not only character to the ring, because we kind of forget at times, because of how seamlessly it's edited in, that the ring itself is a character. And even though it was created from Sauron's power,
it's its own entity.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is something that I think the level of thought and detail that Jackson put into this, like, really shows, especially when you focus in on the ring being its own character.
Yes.
Because he mentions in one of the interviews, or it might be one of the commentaries, how from the beginning he wanted this introduction to be from the ring's point of view. Not necessarily Isildur's or even the elves.
Yeah.
It's from the ring's point of view.
Well, and that's part of it too, because okay, I can see how Galadriel's the narrator, just in case you didn't know that.
But also, fuck Galadriel, we don't care.
Well, I can see how she forgot it too, because no one knows what happened to the ring after Isildur died.
No, except the ring.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a good point of it being Isildur. So this is also kind of a weird prologue, because it's also kind of a flashback to the beginning. Because if it's the story of the ring, then no one knows what happened to it until, like, Gandalf does his research and really digs into, like, oh, Gollum found it.
Yes, and this is part of the reason why, and some people...
Sorry, Smeagol found it. To be accurate, you fucking nerds.
But this is also part of, like, when people come later, especially now, come later with what they feel like is a plot hole, and this being one of them, where they're like, oh, well, why does Gandalf need to figure out if this is the ring or not? Part of this is you have to remember that Jackson wrote a good chunk of this from the ring's point of view. Yeah. He saw the ring as its own, almost the main protagonist, and then there was Sam, but Sam has more dialogue. Yeah. Well, and on top of that, there is a little bit of throwaway dialogue that is easily missed. Yes. Gandalf says to Bilbo, there are many magical rings. They shouldn't be used carelessly, or regardless, they shouldn't be used carelessly. Which he's suspectful of it, but we also know that the one ring, unless it's glowing, looks like any other ring. And when handed, as we learned, handed to a hobbit, doesn't cause the devastating powers that it does with everybody else. Or the greed and corruption that we immediately see in men when Isildur won't throw it away. Which, why his elf friend doesn't yeet him into the fire himself? No idea. If you want an idea on that, Nerd of the Rings did I think it was Nerd of the Rings, did a very fantastic episode on theoretical Lord of the Rings history of if Isildur had thrown him into it. There's a lot of lore and tension that was going on between men and elves at the time. No, and it's one of those things where, like, it's fun and easy to point at, but Tolkien thought of all of this for the most part. There's very few actual plot holes from Tolkien's point of view if you take into all of his stupid background. And if you also take in his retconning of The Hobbit. Yes. Which, fair. You kind of have to. Yeah. I completely agree with him changing The Hobbit, because The Hobbit was written as a standalone children's story. It wasn't supposed to turn into what it is. Yes. Fully feel like he had the room to do that. And then on top of that, while Jackson has made it very clear that, like, yes, he knows that some audience members are going to pick here and there at stuff, pretty much everything he cut out or decided to show that he knew was going to potentially cause a problem, he was like, yeah, we did it, but here's where we did cover ourselves later on, or here's why I did it, and tough beans. Yep, exactly. There's just so much craft that went into this. Yes. And speaking of craft, I'll go into our first little bit of design info. Yes. So, Sauron's helmet. Okay, I'm glad you found this. It's inspired by a rotting horse skull. And its menacing spikes and this is where I first saw it. We'll see this later on used in orc, goblin, and Uruk-hai armor, but also as well as, like, the designs, as he himself is honestly the most refined of like all the orcish and all the dark side architecture and everything. His is the most refined and not mashed together or scalped on or scabbed on. And on top of that, his helmet design later leads visual connection to Sauron's the Witch King. Yeah. to the Witch King design, but also to Saruman's tower and his own staff.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, because I'll actually get into that in a little bit.
They're different. They have his own spin, but there is remnants of him there.
I actually have the thought on that, and
okay.
it's specifically in regards to the dark side's
love of modern architecture.
Not that, just so much so that it comes back from some of the lore of that Sauron's actual lord Melkor can't create anything from light, or can't create life from nothing, like Iluvatar, who's the main god, or the main god character in the Lord of the Rings lore.
Yes.
He can only corrupt, and so like with the orcs, everything is a corruption of something that came before.
Yes.
Or an adaptation. Or his take on trying to create something of his own, but it's never truly his own. You're always seeing the remnants of what came before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dirty elves. Also,
the elf armor in this scene is more colored for like spring and leaf motifs. This is the summer era of the elves. And later on we'll see that the elvish colors turn more brownish, taupes. They're not as vibrant.
And then later just plain old whitewashed.
Yeah.
Just bleached to hell.
Yeah, because they're leaving.
Their color has drained away. As is their sense of humor.
Yeah. But also we see changes in the human armor, and we'll get more into that as we get into the Two Towers and Return of the King.
Because you definitely see it better there.
Yeah, because that's where their cultures will be more examining their architecture and their design choices.
And we get to talk about the only group of people on this gosh darn planet who has any differences in their region. The elves claim it. I don't see it.
I do see it. I have notes on it in these two episodes.
Okay.
There are similarities. They are in the same style, but they are drastically different. And it's very much so in the changes we see from the Hobbit to the human world.
Okay.
Where they're related, but they're different.
All right, I'll believe you when I see it.
Okay. Well, there's just a lot of information that nods to the history of the films and filmmaking through the movies. Like the design crew, they reference Isildur's fall to very much turn of the century German films like Fritz Lang's Die Nibelungen.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah, there's a lot, and I mean, I appreciate that too. You don't really see a lot of like, oh, I was inspired by this 1910s, 1920s German flick.
The other thing I like a lot is once, especially with how many hands helped with, especially the shooting of this, once you hear people say like, oh yeah, this scene I'm pulling from 1910s, pre-romance German flick, you're like, oh, yeah, I do see it now that you say that.
Yeah.
But before that, you're not sitting there going, this feels like I'm watching another movie.
No.
Which sometimes I like, but most of the time I'm like, all right, you were trying to make your own movie, but I see another one. I don't hate it, but this time, seamless. Even though there's definitely some references.
Yeah, and in this movie, this is one thing that I actually really won't bitch about, like, the slow motion in it, because it doesn't feel out of place for this one.
It also doesn't feel quite as like drawn out slow motion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very quick moments here and there.
It feels like an appropriate like oh shit moment where like you as the audience is having to process. Yeah,
but it's also used as a way of storytelling in chaotic moments to let the viewer take in some information of, hey, okay, this is going on. Instead of showing a quick flash of that character, it's like, oh shit. Like, the first big one is when Isildur's father falls.
Yes.
And he grabs for his sword that was broken and cuts off the ring.
Yeah.
And it's just that slow motion of like, oh shit. It narrows the importance on this moment of like, one side, this is the end for one side or the other. This is the defining moment.
I also think part of the reason why you don't absolutely hate it is because instead of slow motioning to emphasize action, it's slow motions to emphasize importance of character change.
Yes.
Which makes it feel more like a historic story being told. Like you have time as the teller of the story to be like, and at that moment he realized, I'm screwed.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's at this moment he knew he fucked up.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, honestly, it's such an important, like, little bit to the movie.
Yeah.
But also, speaking of introductions to people, because after this we go right into the Hobbits, after we learn that an unassuming character picked up the ring and it was lost or found. And
it's kind of a harsh snap between this very dark browns and grays color palette and like almost like depressing way of looking at Middle Earth to, and this dude breeds stories in the orchard by himself in his comfortable looking clothes.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
beautiful green scenery everywhere.
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, speaking of design, I mean, the choice of people used for the characters was very specific.
It was, and it's perfect.
They wanted people of a certain appearance to be the hobbits, the elves, the men, and they all have very drastic, like, different appearances.
Yeah, facial features.
Yeah, and I think that was very helpful instead of, like, just picking, oh, that's a good actor, let's put them in there.
Yes, it really does help make it clear that, like, these are different races as opposed to, like, different professions, almost.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, maybe we hang out together, but, like, they are not the same.
No, not at all. And also, one other thing I really like about the prologue that I didn't really catch on until rewatching it, how pretentious the elves are from the get-go.
Oh, no.
3 rings to the fairest and smartest race.
Being said by a fucking elf. And one of the elves in that photo is her.
Yes, exactly.
I'm the prettiest.
Oh, and there's another part later on that the elves are so pretentious.
Yes.
Besides, up until a point, Legolas.
Which is why he is arguably the third kind of elf in this movie, because his father, he was like, you're not pretentious enough to live here. Get out there, son.
Go live the ranger life.
You dumbass. I don't want to talk to you anymore. You're 18. You can take care of yourself.
Yep. And so we transition from the map, which is a beautiful transition.
Oh, isn't it?
Because the maps are used strategically in this movie as a way to scale the world, but also provide references as we go along.
Which is very helpful because Peter Jackson, from the get-go, was like, this movie is going to be long anyway. I don't have time for people to be dilly-dallying around places for 18 years trying to figure out what they're doing with themselves.
Exactly. And also, it introduces people who aren't familiar with the lore of, like, hey, this is the world we're going through.
Exactly.
But it transitions to Bilbo, who is portrayed by Ian Holmes.
A wonderful portrayal.
Who is writing a book as he introduces the Hobbits, with their overall lack of concern with the world around them.
I love this intro. It's so fucking charming.
It is. And it's such a nice contrast to the prologue.
It also, like, most of the time when cute charming is introduced, especially in a world where, like, that is clearly going to be, like, potentially in danger. Which, I mean, that's the whole setup right at the first part of this movie is like, oh, if the ring gets to power, look how terrible the war is gonna be. And then we snap cut to all these hobbits who can barely pick their own ears and just, like, have fun smoking weed and getting drunk. Yeah. Like, all the time. Yeah. That's their whole culture.
I mean, yes, it is. And it's a very simple culture, but it's nice.
Yeah. And this is one of the few times I think in movie storytelling specifically, where we really successfully get not just, like, some people on board with the cutesy nonsense, but the entire audience. Like, there's not a person alive who can look at the Hobbits and be like, yeah, nah, not my thing. Like, no, I don't get it. Yeah. There's nobody out there who's like, oh yeah, you know, kind of like how, like, with other, especially more kids movies do this, where it's like, oh man, the glitter trolls. It's kind of not my thing. Yeah. Like, I can get that. I can understand it. This movie, though, even if you don't want to live there, even if you don't want to be one, you can look at these cute people and be like, they don't deserve war. They don't know what to do with war.
No, they're just really peaceful.
They're too high for war.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who are high during war, and that they were right for war.
Yeah, that's true. Not these ones, though.
Yeah. But I also like this intro because in a way, it ties into the prologue, how we talked about, like, it's almost a history. Yes.
And the other part that's really sneaky here, because Jackson mentioned, I think in an interview, how in his prologue, there is no hobbits. Yeah. This is the first mention of hobbits.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the rest of the world has completely forgotten that hobbits are around.
Well, and for the most part, they really have.
Yeah.
Most people don't know they exist because when we eventually get to Rohan, they're like, what are you chasing? Hobbit, halflings. And they're like, the fuck are you talking about, man?
There's small people hanging on this world?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are cases of that throughout the history of Lord of the Rings. There were the, what were they? They were the pygmy elves, or not pygmy elves, the pygmy dwarfs.
Yeah.
There was a race of dwarfs that was hunted basically to extinction by the elves because they thought they were wild animals.
Whoops.
Yeah.
That might have caused some of the tension there between the two.
Between those two. The other, there's a lot of,
the other ones have insulted each other in different ways, don't worry.
A lot of times. They betrayed each other.
They're terrible best friends.
They're in conflict because they're very much so in the nature that orcs are to elves.
Yes.
Where orcs...
They are their opposite.
Kind of. I mean,
if they were a Pokemon circle, one would be good against the other.
Okay, so yes and no. So, little bit of lore. I'll get into it real quick. Elves were created by Iluvatar.
Yeah.
Melkor corrupted the elves and made them think that into orcs, made the orcs think that he was the creator being. And so the elves were the corrupted ones. And in that same regard, dwarves were not created by Iluvatar. They were created by one of the, I think they're called the Mire. I wrote them down, the Mire. But because it wasn't an imitation. He wanted to create something out of love as well. But they would always be at odds with the children of Iluvatar.
Yes.
So elves, men, and by extension hobbits, which...
Hobbits were actually snuckily made off to the side by a different goddess who went, I want to make something too. And she made cute little hobbits and all the other gods went, oh, look at the idiots. Go live over there. And
that's something about the lore is that hobbits are never really explained. They're mentioned that they're menfolk adjacent, but they're not.
They're not.
They stemmed off at some point, but no one knows exactly where. Specifically in the Stoors, which is Gollum's folk. Or Smeagol's folk, which are proto-hobbits. So there's a little bit of like a weird evolution that's going on that's never really explored.
I love it.
But speaking of that, in that regard as well, I do like this intro because it kind of plays like a history book / documentary of exotic animals.
It really does. Yeah. Like, look at this one. Look at this one.
As it trances across the river. Actually, I wouldn't. Hobbits don't care for moving water.
Nope, not unless you're Brandywine.
The Brandywine Bucks.
This foolish group.
But also just the architecture from the beginning.
So charming.
And so they said it was supposed to be homely with English architecture motifs.
You can see it. There's
rounded.
Yes, you can see the Tudor-esque designs.
I wouldn't even go Tudor. Here's what I'm thinking with this. So
tell me.
It's very picturesque. It's reflective of the English gardens pre-1700s before
very much so.
The French influence, the very structured garden. Oh, this hedge, I got to make it a cube.
Yeah, it's definitely not the French aristocracy garden. It's very much the like English countryside cottage garden of just like stuff everywhere. Plants everywhere.
Yes.
It's all just in there. Height. Lots of color, texture.
Yes, it's very much the vernacular architecture. It's not even Tudor, because Tudor was a bit later.
Yeah, I can see what you mean.
But we do see Tudor a little bit later on in Bree.
Yes.
So there are some influences here and there. But specifically, in regards to Bag End, there's this use of rounded crunk construction, which utilizes heavy wood timbers to collect roof loads. That's mixed with the heavier English Gothic architecture, specifically in like the interior nooks and stuff where it feels like it's missing a column.
Yeah, I can see what you mean.
But the uses of the crunk construction makes it rather country-esque, as this method was mainly used in farm construction.
Yes.
And definitely. Also, we've replaced the thatched roofs with overgrown sod, and it's this very perfect fusion of English-centric motifs. And that's what's fantastic about the overall design of this entire franchise.
Yes.
Is that they're not specifically, and they intentionally chose not to do this. They're like, well, we like where Art Nouveau developed, but what if we took that and applied the concepts of how would that develop within this world?
Yes.
And that's where we're getting like, okay, here's where this little element is here. Here's where this element's here.
And this is why this entire franchise stands out so much in the fantasy world, is because it has those groundings in very real styles, and they're placed in places of the world that already feel like that. Like, the rolling hills of the countryside feel very, like, it's exactly what you picture in the beautiful countryside. And because of all that, even though multiple people have tried to make Hobbit homes a reality and have realized, like, they are not practical at all. No. But it doesn't matter because you are so convinced that these are, like, yes, somewhere out there, this is the way to build. I want to live here.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it, too, is, one, the mixture of wood, stucco, and brick. It's nice because we have the combination of naturalistic materials and obviously man-made.
Yes. It's a good mix between warm, rough, cool. Lots of good textures going on.
Yeah. But we also get to see a little bit of the Shire, and it's in that, as we mentioned, there's the rolling hills, but everything feels organic. The curvilinear nature of the Hobbit homes feels akin to just like something that nature would do. It doesn't
at any point feel like they have forced anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's quaint.
It is incredibly fucking quaint.
Yeah. Also,
so cute.
Well, I'm also sitting there and thinking of like how much structure is really the further back in Bag End you go, because there's the tree on top of it. It's like, oh, there's a lot.
Yeah, I've watched many actual architect or
engineers.
A lot of engineers, a lot of just like people who have no background in building try and build these suckers. And I would like to know how Bag End is standing. I have a lot of serious questions.
Magic.
Yeah, that is literally all that's going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think...
But, like, I don't care. Like, it's especially for the Hobbits. Because the elves later on, there is definitely portions that purposely feel like magic is holding them up. And that's part of it. Yeah. And same thing with the dwarves, but in a different way. Like, their spaces feel like they're holding magic as opposed to being held up by them.
Yeah.
Whereas with the Hobbits, it almost feels just like with the surrounding environment, where they are completely in one with harmony with whatever magic they've got in the world. Yeah.
Well, specifically the floating columns. Look at English Gothic architecture of the churches and stuff. I mean, there's a lot to it if you really want to go down that rabbit hole.
We also have to hold up a giant oak tree.
And there's also math involved, which I don't want to fucking do math right now.
I picked a different degree for that reason.
Yeah. But interesting, the lead time to make Hobbiton was a year, and that's part of the reason it feels so good is because they let everything grow naturally back to where it was instead of like, well, there's a clump here.
And it is one of the few parts where you know that there's some CGI going on in certain spots. But for the most part, it reads seamlessly.
Yeah. Well,
and even the CGI that's there is really not that much.
Yeah, even into the details of stuff too, like the fireplaces. One of the fireplaces is rounded.
Yes, I love
the very cutesy like kitchen nook fireplace.
And then on top of that, the details that some of the artists had mentioned when they're going through some of these scenes. Example being like the portraits of Bilbo's parents over the fireplace,
which is Peter and Freya.
Yeah. But like, it would have been so easy to just put a random hobbit up there, and instead they're like, what if it was Peter?
Yeah, which I think is a nice touch, because when we had the opening title card, which we didn't talk about at all, they brought up that everyone was so proud of Peter Jackson not doing Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Yes. It was the Lord of the Rings,
and like even during interviews after this is all over, he harps so much on how different people brought certain elements to this, which is impressive because this man had his hands in every aspect of this subject. Yes, like we've talked about like Titanic, where we were like, wow, he did all of it. This was his project. Yes. Yeah, there were other people helping. Yeah, there's a lot of really talented people helping, but like, this is the opposite. Peter Jackson was part of every part of it, but he leaned so heavy on people to help get this done.
Yeah, and I think it's very humbling because he's recognizing how important the work is, and it's not really his work, it's his adaptation of the work. Yeah. But yeah, it's quite interesting. But also, part of the reason it feels so picturesque is they do some side-by-side comparisons. They digitally scanned and manipulated to boost certain colors to make it feel more Middle-earth and less New Zealand.
Which is fair.
Yeah. And that was the other thing, too, is they were trying to make it as picturesque as possible. That's why a lot of the wide shots and everything feels very painting-like rather than film.
Yes. Which, and like, it helps too later because pretty much this entire movie was filmed in New Zealand. Yeah. And it helps a lot that they did do this because it really helps put the Shire in your mind on this pedestal of, like, perfection. Yes. It is the greenest place in Middle-earth. It is the prettiest place in Middle-earth. Mm-hmm. Even though later, like, not even a few, like, minutes later into this movie, we're going to see some beautiful scenery. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are some beautiful shots. They're just... They're not the Shire. No, exactly. And that's the point. Yeah. Because from here, we are also introduced to Frodo, who's... Oh, dumbass. Portrayed by Elijah Wood, which I love this dynamic from the get-go is... He's off doing his thing where Bilbo's like, Frodo, get the door. Oh, where is that boy? Yes. From the get-go, you're like, Frodo, are you just like Bilbo used to be? Yeah. Yeah, he really much is. He's a very standard Hobbit at this point. Yeah. And we're also introduced to Gandalf, who is portrayed by Sir Ian McKellen. I love it. This is the perfect role for him. And he also Sir Ian McKellen based his performance off of watching J.R.R. Tolkien. Yes. And it is perfect. Yep. It is one of my favorite roles he's ever been in. And it's saying something because the man was in a lot of stuff. Oh, yeah. This is probably, for most of us, his iconic role. Yeah. But I love the shot of Frodo on the tree. For me, it's the most iconic Hobbit image. And just the image of complete disconnection from the world. Yes. He's in a good book. He's under a tree. I definitely tried imitating this as a kid. I still do. Yeah. But, I mean, there's just so much. And here's probably the best place to start about talking about costuming as well. Just because there was about 19,000 costumes. Yes, there was. And everyone had to have costumes at varying stages of travel. Mm-hmm. And every single Hobbit had to have a doubles costume to match as well. But part of that was they had spent so long making sure that the weaves, like the Hobbit weave, that way on the close-up of the Hobbits, look like a real weave instead of like a regular a regular piece of clothing. Yes. It has a deeper texture visually than what like a standard, more modern piece of clothing would. Yeah. All of which were designed by Nalia Dixon and Richard Taylor. Yeah. And in regards to the Hobbit folks, their costumes were very much geared towards country folk. Yes, everything is soft and comfortable and a little put together. Yeah, no, it's very... What's the term? It's very... It makes me think of like... It's so aesthetic. Yes, it makes me think of like old Irishmen. Yes, very much so. Yeah. Which was definitely part of her inspiration. Exactly. But also at this point, it's mentioned that Jackson used continuous long shots of Gandalf and Frodo to make the Hobbits believable from the get-go instead of having a couple shots with Gandalf, a couple shots with Frodo, and always in shots together. Yes, and it really helps solidify like the reality that Elijah Wood is Frodo in every scene that you see him in, even though there's plenty of instances where it's his double. Yeah. And like if you pick it apart, you can tell. Yeah, especially in this first movie, in these first few scenes. Yeah. But for the most part, you don't notice. No. And like especially when they're like riding by hobbits and stuff as they get back up to Bag End, you fully believe that like everyone here is tiny. Yeah, it's much better than children with beards or little people. It is a lot more believable than children with beards. Yeah. Especially because we finally get hobbit children in this movie and they're so fucking cute. They're adorable. They're so cute. But I also love how carefree even Gandalf is in this moment. Because there's a lot that's going on outside of Hobbiton, but it doesn't show until later down the line. This feels like Gandalf's vacation spot. Yeah. I mean, it is, but Gandalf is kind of like... Well, he's kind of like the... not missionary, like... The Chaos Bringer? Yeah, he is the Chaos Bringer. I want... My goal is to be, as an uncle, be like Gandalf. Be the Chaos Bringer. Yeah.
But no, kind of like the naturalist,
Yes.
studying these people in their natural environment and habitat.
And they know it. That's part of the reason why throughout the books it's multiple times like people are like, Gandalf's kind of weird, isn't he?
Yeah. But despite Bilbo's want for peace, Frodo reveals that all is not as it seems. Bilbo's getting to the point where like he's longing for adventure again after a long 30-50 year break from adventuring.
And has well reached past the point of any natural hobbit.
Yes.
Good damn, man.
Because he's about, his 100...
It's 111th birthday.
Yes, which is very rare because hobbits normally live till 100 at the latest.
Yes. Also, fun fact, Bilbo and Frodo have the same birthday, which was part of the reason he was adopted in the first place.
And he saw something in him.
Yeah, I think it was mostly because he was like, birthday buddy.
Yeah. I've been planning this for 50 years. Don't you fuck it up, Frodo.
Yes.
But I can't get over how beautiful these sets are.
Oh, it's gorgeous. And especially for Inside Bag End, they had to build 2 different versions of it. One for when it's Hobbit-sized and one for when it's smaller for Gandalf. And the flow between those 2 sets is seamless.
Yeah.
You really have a hard time picking apart when they switch from one set to the other. You have a hard time telling, because there's different scenes here with Bilbo and Gandalf where they are in the same room. But because of really clever forced perspective, you 100% buy in that Gandalf is so much taller than everyone else.
And there's a little goof of him bumping his head that
he wasn't meant to.
No, which just adds to the charm of the movie. And
it really does.
I wonder how many movies where that happens, where like someone bumps their head and it's not supposed to happen.
It happens enough because in Star Wars, didn't they add the sound effect of him bopping his head?
Because he didn't raise the. He's a little tall. He's a little tall for a stormtrooper. He was a tiny bit too tall for a stormtrooper. But also, again, going back to the architecture, the homes feel very much like an elevated seasonal home, and very much so the hobbits are more at nature than even the elves themselves. Because the elves are very much so, they take nature and then they refine it. They enhance it.
They definitely feel like studies of nature.
They feel like
they have studied this mushroom in all of its glory to ever ending. And the hobbits are like, have you tried frying the mushroom in butter?
Yeah. The hobbits feel like that stoner college kid where like the elves are very much the age-old pompous academic.
And the hobbits very much are the stoner kid who happened to invent the most brilliant invention of all time.
Yeah.
The other thing that I really like is the lived-in clutter.
Yes.
Of not just Bilbo's house, but the entirety of the Shire. Nothing feels like the elves, everything feels kind of empty. It feels like a museum almost.
It feels like there's a place for everything.
There's a place for everything. You'd have a hard time telling me who lives in what spot in the elf homes. Like, I honestly have no idea where any of them keep any of their shit.
I don't think we see an elf home.
We see a bed, but it's an infirmary. So, like, I don't know. Where do y'all sleep? They have to sleep somewhere.
I don't know if elves sleep or not.
They have beds, surely. They gotta like laying down flat.
Everyone
likes laying down flat.
Yeah, true.
And the same thing with the dwarves, though. Like, we see their grand halls and stuff, and we know that they have, like, homes somewhere in there, but, like... And yeah, it's more clutter than the elves, but it all feels like work clutter. It doesn't feel like homely clutter.
And honestly...
And then the poor men feel like they're, like, peasants scraping by with their one bucket and a piece of bread.
Yeah, and honestly, like, the most architecture we explore is the architecture of men and hobbits, even though after we leave the Shire, we never see anything else really truly what we...
not proper Hobbit.
Idealized Hobbit.
Yes.
Yeah. But also just the use of shapes in this movie is
brilliant.
Angular to... It makes a nice combination of soft and rounded edges that are natural, but also we know it's lived.
Yes. And this is where it's subtle, but it's incredibly distinct. The Hobbits, all of their stuff is beautiful arched and round, which is different than the natural flow of the elfish architecture and style.
Yes.
Theirs very much feels like a river or like wind design.
Also, the ironwork on that door.
Oh my god, it's gorgeous. Those hinges are holding some heavy-ass door up.
So pricey.
So expensive.
I think Jackson said he has bag end.
He did mention that when they were done, it was going to just be torn down like all sets, and he was like, I can't.
Yeah.
I love this sucker too much. I want to know where he put it.
I think it's at Weta somewhere, probably.
Probably, but I also kind of hope he had it moved to like his backyard. That's his bro cave. It's just
I think he's talked about turning it into like a museum or something at some point.
I know there have been talks about turning a lot of the set stuff into museums, but I don't know how much of it has survived long enough for that to happen.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, like, they did a good job building this, but it, unfortunately, is a set.
Yeah, it's set architecture. It's not
built to last.
It's not built to last the standard 50 years that we do for commercial work.
No, and if you're going to put stuff that heavily underground and with that much stuff growing on it, like, it's going to deteriorate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially when most of this is, unfortunately, held together with hot glue.
I don't know about that.
And some double-sided sticky tape.
But Gandalf and Bilbo are reunited. I love this because we've already established and it's just good writing too, we've already established with the introduction of Frodo that Bilbo's being bothered by people at the door.
Yes.
So he opens angrily, but it's Gandalf. And he's like, fuck yeah, my favorite person.
I feel very spiritually akin to Bilbo.
My favorite being. But it really develops the character of Bilbo. Just
yes.
He's down to drink with Gandalf and chill, but
nobody else. I want family members rolling around in here.
Yeah, I mean,
even though I'm actively planning a party of over 100 people, like 140 people or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, we also like Bilbo's barely part of these movies. Like we see him in this movie, and then very much so at the end. But all the character that's developed and all the and that's the thing. Even the small side characters of like the farmer sweeping his entranceway, glaring at Gandalf. Like
even our farmer, who we never see, we only see his little scythe bobbing up and down in the field. Like he even
Farmer
has
Maggots.
Yeah, even he has character. Like people write whole stories about him, and he's not even in this movie.
Yeah, well, you're reading like a fanfic of like the Eagles lately.
I finished that one quite a while ago. But yes, like, if it is a remote character somewhere in the story, they have an entire life written out somewhere.
Mm-hmm. But also at this point, like, speaking of growth and just development, Bilbo mentions that he misses the mountains, as I do too.
I can understand. And this is unintentional, but perfect tie-in, because way later we gotta get to the Hobbit somehow.
Yes. Well, and also he mentions that he sees the adventurous spirit in Frodo, but he understands that Frodo's still in love with the Shire, very much how he was at the beginning of The Hobbit.
Not saying that he wants Gandalf to kick him out the front door, but also, like, it would hurt him. Yeah.
And there's a whole backlog of, like, Lord of the Rings did, like, why Bilbo was chosen out of all the hobbits.
Yes.
And it is because of his ancestry and lineage.
Yeah, especially when you find out that Bilbo's family invented golf.
I didn't know that.
Bilbo's family invented golf.
Huh.
It was done with a goblin head, I think, and a golf roll.
I don't know. I've never looked at that side of Lord of the Rings. But originally, without the prologue, the history was supposed to be explaining this portion. Like, Bilbo was supposed to write out the whole history.
Yeah.
And honestly, they said it would have taken 3 times longer to explain, which honestly, they really nailed the pacing with the prologue being added.
I think so.
And honestly, they also said these sets were some of the hardest as they were small to shoot in and scaling was difficult. And the technique of scaling and doing these types of shots only works for statics and pans and tilts. You can't do dynamic camera angles.
No, because then you would notice that the dining table is in fact 2 different tables set 5 feet apart.
Yep, which they had to match fabrics and wood grains on that too.
Which is why it looks completely seamless.
Oh, it is beautiful.
It is perfectly done.
But they did tricky shots and moving cameras as well as moving platforms just to get everything and everything was done on a dolly. Yeah. And
it looks so good.
Mwah.
So good.
Another thing of note is the amount of... I went over that. Sorry. Yeah. I'm going to cut that.
Okay.
So, On to the birthday party.
I want nothing more in my life than to be invited to this birthday party. It looks fun as fuck.
It does.
Giant ass cake, endless amounts of ale being poured.
Frodo's a great wingman.
Frodo is an excellent wingman because, especially, I don't think it's in the original. I think it is in the extended though. Bilbo panics because his terrible cousins are and he has an ear twitch, and that's how he knows they're coming. His ear twitches. That's so funny.
And the part you're talking about is him, because in the theatrical version, he and Frodo don't talk at all.
No, there is very little interaction between Frodo and Bilbo in the theatrical version.
Yeah, and this is the part where he tells him that he didn't adopt him out of pure kindness. He saw something in him, and just
little rude since he's about to disappear.
Yeah,
but also we also are establishing that Bilbo's always been just a hair bit selfish.
Yeah, and Frodo's like, have you been at the gaffer again?
Maybe he's gone on these ideas of leaving before.
Or he's been on a drinking binge.
Which seems about right for this place.
Yeah. But also of note, all the Hobbit hair is very brush-like, which is an emphasis of their nature and their status to it, which the elves, again, are very fair.
Yes. A lot of long flowing horse manes there on the elves.
Yeah, but also in this, like I said, the installment, the special effects are some that aren't as great. The fireworks.
The fireworks could be better, but at the same time, if you're full in this movie, you don't care.
No.
The other thing that I think could be better, and it's something that these special effects artists talk about just a little bit, I think. I don't know, one of the artists talk about a little bit, is how for the Hobbit scenes, pretty much everyone there is just, they're not like actual actors with the exception of the main cast.
Yeah.
It's mostly just background people, and it's a lot of people that they're like, hey, you want to be a Hobbit? How about you?
Yeah, well, they selected a bunch of people from Meta.
Yes.
They wanted people with very round faces, buttony noses.
Yes. And so they had to put wigs on everyone.
Yeah.
And you can tell on some people. There's a couple of wigs that just aren't quite fitting right. Because, this party probably took quite a while to shoot. Mm-hmm. Some of these are actual children being forced to wear wigs and fake ears and fake feet, which is a lot to ask children to do.
Yeah.
And then to sit there and pretend to be enthralled in Bilbo's half a story.
We also get our first shot of Peter and Fran's kiddos.
Yes, so cute.
They're all cameoed in it.
Yes, there's a surprising number of cameos, but they're all done so stealthily. Mm-hmm. They think the kids are the most obvious cameos, and you wouldn't know who they are because they're actual children.
Yeah, and I forgot to bring this up in the prologue. The number, and I'm kind of a little pissed off about this. The number of Wilhelm screams.
Oh, there's quite a few.
That Jackson tried to sneak in.
I know you're upset about it. I feel like this is hilarious because he tried to sneak these in, and as he tried to sneak them in, people regularly were like, no, which cracks me up because later on, once he got to shooting The Hobbit, there's a significant amount of middle fingers that were trying to be snuck into the movie. And so it was beautiful just dessert.
Yeah.
Just,
I only found one in the prologue, but it was the tail end of it.
Yes.
So it wasn't the full one.
He tried very hard to get them in.
There are full-on Wilhelm screams by the third movie.
Yes, there are. He just really found them to tickle his fancy. I also think that by this point, even though this is still incredibly early on in the movie, this sucker has taken them literal years to get to this point.
Yeah.
And at some point, you gotta have a little fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I mean, just from a viewership. And we should do a rant on the Wilhelm scream at some point.
We will.
But also of note, design-wise, all the plates and mugs are very simple for the Hobbits.
Yes.
These
are party plates.
Well, even in the regular stuff you see in the background and bagging and whatnot, they're all simple.
Yes.
They're not ornate. There's nothing fanciful.
They're almost what you would think of as garage sale china.
They're very much the Instagram chill Sunday morning mug.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
And the part that cracks me up is not just one, but I think 3 or 4 different writers and artists talk about how there are details in this party scene because they all read through the books trying to get this party scene just right.
Yep.
And there's multiple tiny details that they're like, I wish we could have figured out a way to show that Bilbo gives gifts away on his birthday, not the other way around.
Yeah.
I desperately wish we could have shown how many candles were on this stupid cake.
Yeah, you just can't.
No, they can't. And they're like, we know we had to cut it, but like, know in our hearts that we thought about it.
Yeah. Also, I love that this is the foundation of Merry and Pippin's fuckery.
Yes.
Because they are always... And
they are the perfect fuckers.
Yeah, because when I was younger, I had a hard time distinguishing between the two.
I still do.
But
Until one gets taller.
Yeah. But, Pippin is just... Pippin is the dipshit that keeps shit going.
Yes, he is.
When the movie gets stale, his fuckery causes more bullshit.
Yes, and I will say, this is one of the nice, like, developments of Lord of the Rings, is because I watched this movie to the point where I can quote all of it to you, extended edition and all. Like, I'm not shitting you when I say I watch this movie every day for, like, a year. And even now, still going back, after watching this probably close to a couple thousand times,
yeah,
I still can pinpoint new little bits in this movie. And, like, it's my most recent one that I've been noticing is the maturity difference between Merry and Pippin. And it is so minute in the first movie, but it's still there. And
it grows. And that's the thing of, like, especially because last time I had seen these movies was before I really started diving into film study. But like just the growth of the side characters, especially Merry and Pippin.
Who honestly, especially in this first movie, don't get a lot of screen time.
No.
They barely get any dialogue.
And they're just kind of a fun side character to have there, which I know a lot of people complain that they have a lot more comedy between them than what's in the book. Which,
I don't give a shit.
No, exactly.
I love them.
They were needed. And
yes.
Like we said, like Tolkien said, he didn't think his works were fit.
No.
And the way they were, as they're written, they're not.
No.
But,
and someone has to balance out Frodo's grumpy ass.
Exactly. The seriousness of Frodo and Sam until about halfway through the story.
Yeah.
After, actually, by Return of the King is when they have to grow up.
Yes.
Because that's the other thing about these stories, is it's not just a story about saving a world. It's a story about maturing and growing up from these
Honestly, for everyone.
Children, yeah.
And, like, they grow the most maturity-wise, but, like, that's every single character in this, like, the entire Fellowship, that, with the exception of Gandalf, who can go fuck a stick, like, everyone in this does some amount of, like, maturing.
Yeah.
Even the ones who are arguably too old to be doing said maturing.
Yeah.
And then die.
True. And so it is on to Bilbo's big speech and disappearance.
I love it, because Bilbo very much feels like he knows he's required to give the speech.
Yeah.
He has written something out. We know he wrote something out. It's written up in his pocket, because he's bad at giving speeches, doesn't want to, thinks he's going to give it on the fly, fucks it up, says, damn it, doesn't matter, and disappears.
Yeah.
This is how I want my public speaking to go.
Well, I like that we've seen Bilbo as kind of generous / kind of stingy about, stoogey about it.
Bilbo thinks that he himself is selfish, and everyone else in the Shire thinks that he is very generous.
Yeah.
With the exception of his, like, set of cousins who thinks that he's the worst for, making them not live in his own home.
Yeah, well, I mean...
But they also sound like assholes, so...
Oh, yeah. But I love that he is very dickish and spiteful.
He is so dickish for a hobbit, but also I love it because it's perfect. Like, of course this perfect picturesque town is going to have assholes, and one of them's our main character. Who raised our other main character, who also turns out to be a bit of an ass.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also a nice attitude change, because, I mean, he's grown restless and he's leaving.
And also,
for what he wants.
He's one of the few hobbits who has truly seen... Not even all of it. He saw a tiny portion of the world, and it changed him.
Yeah.
He came back jaded, in a way. And it, like, even though he's now lived in the Shire for, like, 50, 60 years afterwards, he's still grumpy about it.
Yes. But we also get this big change in the level of seriousness, because we've had about 30 minutes since the prologue. But here's where... the darkness comes back.
It's beautiful.
Because we get to see that little change of the ring of, oh, it's on the mantle. No, it's not. He's like, well, oh, wait, it's still in my pocket.
And it's the most interesting tiny little shift in character.
Mm-hmm. Well, why shouldn't I keep it? It's mine. It's my precious.
There's like a build to it, which I really like, because especially with a lot of crazy characters, unless the craziness is the focus of the movie, 9 times out of 10, the craziness like snaps on and off. It feels very much like 2 different persons, kind of like Smeagol and Gollum, but instead of like having them simultaneously together, not even necessarily fighting like a lot of superhero movies try to do, this feels like an addiction. Yeah. Like he's not in control of himself, and he knows it, and he's scared of it. Yeah,
but also we get to see Gandalf be dark for the first time.
Oh, I love it. I know...
I'm not trying to rob you. Yes. I'm trying to help you.
And I know Jackson says over and over again that he doesn't like magic in movies, which is part of the reason why Gandalf really doesn't do a whole lot. Like, none of the wizards do a whole lot of magic. And that's part of the praise of Lord of the Rings in general, is like, it's a fantasy world that is steeped in magic, but being light in magic at the same time.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is the wizards aren't really supposed to be using their magic a whole lot.
No, but it's one of the huge difference between how the wizards used to be. Like, Gandalf in the old ones, like, was constantly lightning thunderbolts. Yeah. He had, like, magic wizard fingers. Like, it was very, Darth Sith-esque.
Well, there's a Grand Chancellor Palpatine.
That's it. That's the ugly toad I'm thinking of.
Well, there's a part in the commentary where Peter Jackson says he doesn't like when magic is shot from lightning bolts from fingers, which I think is his snide remark to Star Wars.
Which is hilarious, because that's exactly what all of the Lord of the Rings imagery used to be, even though like. In the books, the wizards don't really do a lot of wizarding.
Side of van art kind of magic.
Very much across the side of a van that you think someone lives in that. Yeah. Someone lives in that full time.
Yeah, but again, this is going back to like, hey, it's drawing us back in that, hey, there's more going on outside of hobbits. Yes. We've set up our main character. We've set up these peaceful little people. It's time to start moving on. Also, side note, the design for the ring was based off co-producer Rick Pora's wedding ring.
Lucky bastard.
Which they needed it for a test shot, which they just felt the style fit perfectly. They didn't want something ornate. They just wanted something very simple. Because
it's perfect.
The rings aren't described at all in the books. Again, this goes back to like Tolkien being very descriptive in some parts.
He describes every fucking flower between here and Bree, but not the rings.
Yeah, which is beautiful.
And I love it. It also, like, helps very much, like, solidify that, like, for Tolkien, a lot of this was from the Hobbit's point of view. And they would have spent all of their time looking at the flowers and not noticing what the ring looked like. Yeah. Like, they wouldn't have spent time being like, wow, look at the little engravings on it. So pretty.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot. And that's why there are channels upon channels, episodes upon episodes, dissecting this movie.
Oh, for sure.
And that's why we wanted to focus on the design, because I feel or especially the architecture, because I don't think that's ever really been deeply analyzed.
Not that I've noticed.
No. And for an audio format, I wish we could show photos and whatnot. But...
Don't worry. They can watch the movie themselves. It's easy to get a hold of. It plays on TV regularly.
So Bilbo heads out, and Frodo returns to find the ring and a pensive Gandalf, who won't pick up the ring.
Gandalf, you little bitch.
Yeah. But I get it too, because I understand Gandalf's hesitancy. Yes. Especially as we see how it tempts other people down the line. This is the first time we've seen Gandalf go from chaos bringing uncle to responsible adult. Yes. Responsible wizard.
Something he is rarely.
Yeah, for a good chunk. Like, because, it doesn't, and I think it's in Return of the King, Sauron says, the Hobbit pipeweed has cloud... Oh, no, it's this one. Yes. The Hobbit pipeweed has clouded your mind.
And he's like, yeah, it's good shit.
But from here, we cut to Mordor, with Gollum revealing, just saying 2 words, the Shire... Bagginses.
Which, for a time pre-Google, is very impressive they found this place as quickly as they did.
Well, that's cutting a lot of ground, because the Ring Wraiths do leave, but here's why y'all are fucking lying if you want to see a full
You don't want to see
adaptation.
it. It's so dry.
There's 11 years between this and Frodo leaving?
Yeah. No, in the books, all of your questions and complaints have been well thought out and fixed. But in the movie, we don't have time for 11 years worth of figuring out our life.
There's a fifth Hobbit who stays behind to make sure that Frodo sells bagging. He moves into another place, and the other guy is supposed to imitate Frodo.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's a fifth Hobbit who no one gives a shit about. Yeah. Well, and this is the next, almost the, final race of people is the Ring Wraiths.
Mm-hmm.
And it is fascinating to see how Peter Jackson tried to go with them, because they are arguably the most direct enemy in this movie.
Yes.
Because, the eye is terrifying and scary, and, the idea of war is terrible, but it's, on the horizon, it's not here now, whereas these are actively pursuing you.
Yeah, and that was one of the things they struggled with, was trying to balance that, and that's where we'll get some of the other orc characters down the line, because I understand the flaming eye of Minas Morgul is
it's spooky, but it's not that spooky. It can't
no,
come
not
get
Minas
me.
Morgul, Amadur.
Yeah, the one on the tower.
Yeah,
the only other giant eye.
Yeah. But it can't do anything. It's not moving. It's not pursuing. It's just you getting to it.
Yeah, and unless you're actively wearing the ring, it doesn't really seem to be involved in a whole lot.
No, not at all. I mean, it's the last remnant of Sauron's power.
Yeah, which, again, still scary and terrifying, but, it's over there.
Yeah.
It's over there. It's fine.
Exactly.
Whereas these things are, from the moment their designs were shown, from the moment they show up on screen, you're like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
These are scary.
Minas Morgul is where they flee from, because Gandalf goes to pursue research at the library at Minas Tirith.
Yes.
To track down what happened to Isildur's Bane, which is what the ring is referred to.
Gandalf is a master Googler pre-Google.
Oh.
Man goes through a lot of stuff.
Okay, I'll get there. There's a little bit there that I like too.
Yes.
So, one, I do like the stark contrast of the finely chiseled library to Hobbiton.
I love it. And, it's dark, and it looks cold in there. He's, wearing gloves.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it feels, and it's dusty. It's dirty.
Yeah.
Despite it being an ancient library.
Well, while he's reading, cutting between, him and, reading the passage he needs, there's a cut and the candles have melted.
Yes, the detail. And I love it, too, because when, I think it was, a few years after the extended version came out on DVD, a lot of people kept putting in rumors that, there was a car driving in the background of the Shire, and there was a sticker on the apples.
Yeah.
And that sort of stuff. And Peter Jackson himself went back and rewatched the film and was, pausing it, trying to find the goddamn car that he missed. He's like, there's no car.
Yeah, I don't blame him. I really don't blame him.
He's like, there's no sticker on this apple. I would have seen the sticker.
But yeah, and again, just to reiterate, the reason Gandalf is doing this is because there is multiple magic rings.
Yes.
There's not a specified number. They're all lesser rings, but it's not the ring.
And yeah, because it's something that doesn't really get brought up in the movies directly.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of every once in a while, in passing, it's mentioned hey, you do know that there's sorcerers in this world, right? There's just normal men who can do magic.
Yeah.
And there's necromancers or there used to be necromancers in this world. There's a couple of messages of witches. There's magic users who could potentially make lesser rings.
If I remember right in the books, there's a necromancer that's been walking the woods. It's just Sauron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's when they say that, no one's oh, a what?
Yeah.
Hold up. We don't have those. People are oh yeah, that's...
Yeah. It's not like Hobbit. What the hell are you?
Yeah, hobbits are the most strange creatures ever, and they've lived in the same spot for decades.
Yeah.
Centuries.
Yeah, there's a lot to that too.
So I like that there's not a direct talks of why Gandalf is here, because it does leave stuff for people like you and me who need things to mull over. But it's easy enough, especially if you don't want to go through all the book lore. It's fairly easy for you to be okay, well, later on in the second and third movie, or even back in the Hobbit movie, if you want to count all of them together, yeah, okay, like, yeah, maybe this is just like a trick party ring.
Yeah, well, and that's what everyone thinks it is. Because it's also, in the books, everything, Merry and Pippin also know that Bilbo has magic ring.
Like,
because one of them saw him, like, he saw him and he saw, the Brandywines, I think. It's not the Brandywines. The relatives he hates.
The Shackville?
Yeah.
Shackfire. I can't remember. The asshole ones.
Yeah. And they saw him put on the ring.
To get away from them?
Yeah, to disappear while they walked by. And then he saw him reappear.
Of course they would know.
So Merry and Pippin knew. And there's this whole...
And if they know, half the Shire knows.
No, actually they don't. Because they thought it was like a weird little thing. And so they kept it secret.
What, are they planning on taking it for themselves?
Well, so... in the book, what happens is Frodo starts planning his leaving. But Samwise, Merry, and Pippin, and their other friend, who I can't remember his name.
Fifth Hobbit.
Like the Fifth Element, the Fifth Hobbit.
The Hobbit.
They're like, hey, we know what you're doing. You're not as sneaky as you think you are.
None of you are sneaky.
Yeah, because Frodo starts selling off his goods and everything to disappear.
Uh-huh.
And so they're like, hey, we'll help you get away, kind of thing.
Yes, I remember that part.
Yeah, so there are big differences. But all that takes place over 11 years.
It's so long.
Yeah. But back to the Hobbits. We get the Green Dragon scene, which was cut from the original, but is very important because it shows the old Hobbits gaggling over world affairs. They know that there's something else going on. They're not as uncaring as we are first led to be.
Yeah.
But it's all the old ones where it's like the young ones are just kind of there like...
They're there on beer night.
Yeah, we're here to listen and drink.
Yeah, where the old ones are like, this could impact us.
Yes.
Because if you think about it, like, in The Hobbit, they talk about a little bit of the history that, like, the bad things that have happened to the Shire. Mm-hmm. And so, like, these would be the Hobbits who briefly remember some of that happening. Yeah.
Well, and on top of that, like, it also just builds up, like, why the Hobbits are leery folk.
Yeah. I would be too. You're half the size of everybody else, if not less.
Yeah. But also, why I like the Green Dragon scene as well. Also, it builds Sam's character and his shyness to the barmaid.
It's so cute. Because, otherwise... what is Sam doing other than just following Frodo around?
It starts building Sam's reason to go back to the Shire.
It does. And it also helps so much with the, third ending of the final movie?
Yeah. But it also shows that Hobbiton is a bit grungier and earthy in some manners and less round.
Yeah. Like, they've got some, man-folk style designs.
Yeah. But it makes Bag End feel that much more special.
It really does.
Yeah, because, we've seen the Green Dragon. It's in one of the shots. It's a much bigger establishment. We realize that, hey, this type of mole-ish architecture only works for small houses. Even though Bag End is a bigger house, the hallways and the room dimensions are relatively small in comparison.
It helps when you're a tiny person.
Yeah, exactly. And so Frodo returns home. Mm-hmm. Here's where... I always love this thing in watching movies where the director has a horror background. Mm-hmm. Because they do such a great job with heavy shadowing and just playing up these really dark moments.
So intense.
Because we've seen Bag End in a normal setting, but now it's dark. There's the light's only from the moon. Papers are kind of flying.
A window has been left open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as Frodo enters, a low and haggard, anxious Gandalf comes out. Is it secret? Is it safe?
It's almost jump scary.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's so well done.
It's so well done.
But also this is a great example of the power in names and words, because we only have 2 words that set this whole hunt in motion. Because he's like, oh, it's here, throw it in, and it's like, oh, is there nothing? No, I can't see anything, because of course the ring only reveals its true nature under fire. He's like, there's something appearing, or whatever he says. There's a couple words that he mentions that's like, oh, that oh shit moment for Gandalf.
Yes.
And it is just so well done. And just the way he goes from again, it shows Gandalf's dark side. Don't you tempt me with that, Frodo.
Yes. Even though rude, Frodo doesn't know.
Mm-hmm. Well,
you're the only person outside of, like, maybe some people from Bree.
Yeah, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself. In the lore-wise, it's important to remember that Gandalf is the same type of being as Sauron.
Yes, and, like, it makes sense knowing that from the outside character. Mm-hmm. Frodo does not know that. Gandalf makes fireworks and is somehow old.
Well, and that's the other thing, is most of the people of Middle-earth don't know much about the wizards.
No.
Only the elves know who the wizards really are.
And not even all the elves.
No, it's really only the main 3 big ones.
Yeah.
Because also, the wizards have only been on Middle-earth for about 2,000 years at this point.
Yeah.
So they're a relatively new being.
Yes.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's also worth mentioning just, like, how great the composition and forced perspective shots are on this. This is the scene where Frodo and Gandalf are eating at the table together, or having tea at the table together.
Yes.
So they had to have 2 different pot sizes, so that way Frodo places the pot, Gandalf can grab it and pour him.
It's seamless.
Oh, it's so well done. It's such an old technique too that we see in like Elf and a bunch of other a plethora of other movies.
Yes.
But it also does a good, like, because we get the introduction that Samwise is there, even more so, like,
bless Sam. He saw someone potentially breaking into Frodo's house and was like, I'm gonna go check and see if he's okay, but not gonna go bust in.
Well, it also makes why the Green Dragon was a better scene to have in. I get why it was cut from the theatrical edition.
It would have added.
But otherwise it feels random that Samwise is under there.
Yeah, it does.
Also, in the extended edition is the only time we see Samwise gardening.
Yeah, bless him.
It's very cute.
It is very cute.
But I mean, the scene actually is pretty long. Like,
yeah, it really is, but it paces so perfectly.
Yeah, and it's also just a full setup for like what's ahead of Frodo. Of like,
yes,
the darkness has come to the Shire. There's no escaping it. Everything's in order, and we've seen on the outside that something is actively going to be hunting the Hobbit soon.
Yes, there is no longer hiding here.
Yeah. And, oh, sorry, it wasn't 11 years. It was a 17-year time skip.
Even longer.
Yeah. 17 years of bullshit.
Boy, just really rushing out there, isn't he?
Yeah, but pacing-wise, it works quite well.
Yes.
And one note, as they adventure and start leaving the Shire, because now they're all set to go, it's kind of quickly packed, which I do love that Gandalf is handing him nicely full of stuff, and Frodo's just like shoving it in his bag.
Yes. One of the housemates, when we were watching the commentary, goes, he could fit a lot more stuff in his bag if he just left it folded.
Was that Philip?
It was Erica.
Oh, shit. Philip would be the one stuffing it. Yeah, that's right.
Phil would have already been ready to go.
Yeah. But they do go out on their journey. They start leaving. I love these little shots. All of these shots of them traveling, for the most part, are like pickup shots that they were just doing of like, hey, walk across that field and we'll film you.
Yeah, like, we gotta wait for this or this. Can you just go over there?
But it's beautiful because it starts showing how expansive the world is around them. We start seeing mountains and lakes, and that the world is bigger than Bag End. Yes.
And even once we get to the point where Sam declares, like, that's as far as he's ever been away from home, like, we've seen... it feels like they've walked a really long ways. Yeah. And it's perfect setup because after we fully get the entire fellowship together and then start moving, that's when you see the landscape not just change a little bit, but like drastically change. Yeah. And so like seeing these changes here, you're like, wow, they're going. They're really walking, aren't they?
Because it's still very magical looking, and again, good time skip because I think it takes like a week for them to get out of the Shire.
They take their sweet ass time.
Yeah.
They go sightseeing.
But also of design, the further they leave the Shire, the houses look less and less Hobbitish and look more like the world of men, even though we see them briefly and we'll soon see the full world of Menish architecture. Also, I think one of my favorite lines is, it's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. You stop onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to.
It's a good line.
It is very good.
It's a good line. I also really like that Peter Jackson's detail the songs from Lord of the Rings, the original books. have been tried to be made into various iterations of the previous genres. For some reason, though, Peter Jackson's, all of his feel the most seamlessly put into the movie.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean? Like, when Bilbo is leaving and singing The Road Goes Ever On, there's no, like, question, like, oh, that feels off, like in the old animated Hobbit when the dwarves are singing. You're like, why is this now a musical?
Yeah.
This one just feels like it's so seamlessly flows together.
Yeah, he took the songs and integrated them, because that's one thing I forget too, is that there are so many fucking songs and poems in the Lord of the Rings books.
Yes. And like how do you know what those sound like? That was part of the like book reading experience, is like it's mostly just a poem and then you're told like there's music somewhere in there.
Yeah, they just took an old tune.
And you're like, which one?
There's so many. Do I bang my sticks and rocks like a troglodyte? But on their journey, Frodo and Sam see some wood elves who they mention are going to the White Towers beyond.
You know, all sad and death parade-y.
Very ethereal looking.
Yes. And I like this too because this is setting up the, like, true wonder for Sam. Like, Sam really hasn't dealt with anyone outside the world. Frodo grew up with stories of elves and dwarves. He knows how to read and speak Elvish. Like, Bilbo made sure that, like, even though he's never been there, he knows. Sam, this is, like, a magical trip to Disney World for Sam.
Sam is like the weebs of our modern era.
110%.
The elves are the Japanese.
Yes, and unfortunately he gets picked with Legolas. The most Western of the most non-elfy elf possible.
The one who has very little lines.
He does have very little lines, and he also spends a great deal of his time proving how un-elf-esque he is.
Yeah, because he likes dwarves. Or he likes Gimli.
He likes Gimli.
He
likes just the one dwarf. And Gimli spends all his time proving that he is his father's son.
Yes, I like Gimli.
I love Gimli.
And in the meantime, Gandalf heads to Isengard.
You know, to talk with his best friend.
Or, what at this point is only the Tower of Orthanc.
Yes.
Because
it still has nice, pretty gardens.
Yes, to meet Saruman, who is portrayed by the legendary horror icon, Christopher Lee.
Yes, and the two of them together on screen as wizards is some of the most convincing shit I have ever seen in my life.
This is, for me, the beginning of my goal to eventually become a haggard old wizard man.
Yes. I think once everyone saw them on screen, they were like, without a doubt, no questions asked, those two men are wizards.
Yes. And of which, McKellen, he said he underestimated Lee's acting ability due to his previous works.
And then they turned out to be very good friends.
Yes. And Christopher Lee is, rest in peace. He is...
Yes.
A
wonderful actor.
I've been starting to see some of his more works since I've been going through my Hammer horror film set. But...
he had an amazing set of works.
Oh, he's just iconic. He has a very
distinct voice.
He has a very sharp voice in comparison to like McKellen's voice.
Yes, and it feels all the time, even when he's playing someone theoretically good. He sounds like he's plotting.
He sounds like the quintessential like English.
Yes, he sounds like an English villain.
Yes,
he sounds like a Bond villain all the time.
Wasn't he a Bond villain?
He might have been a Bond villain.
I think he was a Bond villain. I can't remember.
But like that's the vibe he gives all the time. So even though right now, according to Gandalf, he is not a bad person. He is a good wizard who's like head of their chapter, knows a ton of shit. He'll know what to do.
Well, and so here's the other thing too is Lee is the only member of the cast who had personally met Tolkien.
Yes. And
he is a big fan. He reads the books he read the books every year.
Yeah. He still does.
In heaven.
Yeah. Tolkien has a reading circle. He reads them out loud to everyone.
And Christopher Lee, will you be Sauron? Well, he originally was going to be Gandalf.
Yes.
But he was too old for the role, even though he's like 5 years older than McKellen.
I know. Well, and the other thing is especially having them next to each other. Like, they are both perfectly wizard-esque.
Yes.
But one, because of just face shape, one feels a little bit more
evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got the sharp face that we normally associate.
He's got the sharp nose.
Yeah.
And, like, I know that there's prosthetics. Hardly a single person in this movie didn't get anything on them.
Even though McKellen has a big nose, they had
added
to
more.
put a prosthetic on it.
But, like, even then, like, partially because he already has a large nose, the rest of his face shape flushes that out really nicely.
And the reason they had to do a bigger nose on McKellen was because once you get the beard and the hat...
It kind of disappears.
The nose gets smaller.
Yeah. And
I think with Christopher Lee, they put an extra, like, crook in his nose.
I think they made his crook just a hair bigger.
Yeah.
But, like, on top of that, he has such sharp eyes that it's really hard to imagine him as the, like, pot-smoking Hobbit friend wizard. Yes.
And here's the thing. So, here's why I love their appearance, is these are the only two wizards we see. Yes. They are so contrasting because... Saruman feels refined and crafted. That's the other thing. He feels more in line with, like, the elves. Gandalf feels like a cool old man with a stick.
And I have a theory about this. And the tower and the grounds from the beginning behind him kind of, like, help me lean into this. Mm-hmm. That the new evil order of Sauron and Saruman is modern high-rise architecture.
Yeah, that's...
And that's part of, like, I'm pulling that from a couple places. The almost empty but perfectly manicured grounds. There's a handful of bushes, there's some shrubbery, but there's not, like, growth. There's not, like, a pot of flowers. There's, like, a shrub and then a lawn.
That's what we see in front of it.
Yes. And behind, of course, there's the forest for now.
Yeah. Well, we also forget that...
But there's a wall around it, too.
Yeah. So the forest has grown into it. And so here's the thing. So this is why I want to get into the architecture of Isengard. So Isengard is based on a illustration by Alan Lee that was supposed to, like, somewhat be made of obsidian.
Yeah.
In concept. But the walls of Orthanc are drastically different. Mm-hmm. They feel much older.
Yes.
So, like, it feels like it's an ancient fortification that the tower was built inside afterwards.
Exactly. They do not look like they belong to the same person.
In regards to the architecture, it's rather monolithic, which we see in a lot of old skyscrapers.
It feels like very 1960s skyscraper.
Yeah, the very old ones where it was like stone construction, and then
glass.
And then we got into steel once we got over 4 floors.
It feels like the ugly phase of New York City.
Yeah. Fun fact for people: early what they called skyscrapers were like 4 or 5 stories tall.
Which back then was pretty fucking tall.
Yeah.
But, like, even those had, for the most part, most of them had some level of detail, which is why, especially cities that were never originally super tall, like Kansas City's a great example. You can pick which of those brick buildings are the old ones because of the details around windows, on corners, just little places where there's, like, more effort put in than we normally do now. And this feels like the next stage over from that, where it's just glass from floor to ceiling. Yeah, maybe the form's a little cool, but, like, you can't appreciate it from ground floor.
Yeah. Well, okay, so this architecture stems from the Dunedain, which are an offshoot of the Númenórean.
Oh, okay.
Which we'll mainly see Númenórean ruins.
Yes.
Which, if we look, is very geometric, very angular. So the more we see Orthanc, the more angular it looks.
Yeah.
We're more used to that. But at the same time, this is the first start where we start to see it ties back into Sauron and the orcs, where it's very angular, so it feels like maybe this was like a one-off building that they did, and Sauron started copying it because he liked the design, so he's like, well, I'm going to corrupt this intent and make it my own. But it's hard to say since we don't really see any full, like, truly Númenórean architecture, because if I remember right, Minas Tirith, the White City, was built by the elves.
Yeah.
It wasn't built by men.
Which makes sense, as it is far too pretty compared to everything else that they make.
Yeah, but, I mean, everything in this is spiky. The grates on the windows, the lanterns.
So much like a fortress.
Yeah, the throne. I mean,
it looks uncomfortable as shit.
It feels like there was a giant mountain that they just carved out.
And also, the entire thing feels like it squeaks like a basketball court.
Yeah, well, and they also, I don't know if it squeaks. There's very much a click, click, click noise every time.
There's a click, 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 but if you ran through there, it would make that noise.
Yeah, maybe. It's so polished. Polished. Okay.
There is at least 3 orcs whose entire job is just to go around squeaking the entirety of this whole building.
Yes. But the design team mentioned that they wanted hints of Gothic architecture, which we do see in some of the windows. We see they're very
they've got
angular.
The point.
Yeah, they don't have any of the trifoils or anything, which I love that they didn't put that in.
Yes. And this feels more like crystalline. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And at the base, like, we have like what feels like what would become like buttresses. They're not really like flying buttresses. They feel like the closest to like the art of this building as you can get. Yeah, pre what we think of Gothic architecture, where we think of like the step before when they weren't so scared of stuff falling down. Yeah, the step before Notre Dame. Yes. Yeah. The other thing that I really like about this is this architecture style, whether or not it was directly intended, really does a nice job of balancing the idea that Tolkien himself had with this idea of like modernization and the like way forward, destroying the old and the past and the nature of things. And like we see that more directly with the burning of the trees and tearing them down, but this column itself, even the men in this world, even their architecture feels more part of the world than this. This feels very much like a spit or a stain. Yeah, it feels like someone just took a giant spear and stuck it in the ground. Yeah, it feels very alien. Because as we start getting into like the Númenórean designs and stuff, the Númenórean, besides the Anoranths, feel very at nature still. And that's partly because they're overgrown, and what I'll talk about a little bit in the Elvish architecture in the next episode. But also, in how this set was built, it's a wood frame coated with hard coats of black paint, then given a clear coat to give it a depth and waxed feel. Very successful. Little side note, the door handles are lizards. Adorable. It is so cute. But the bigature, which we haven't really talked about these, almost all the sets in this movie have, or all the buildings have models. Very miniatures. Very impressive. Quote-unquote miniatures. This bigature was chipped out of crystalline wax and hot wax to bond pieces together, then a giant silicone mold that was used to create it. And it's about, the entire complex is about 60 feet in diameter. So tiny. So tiny. That's why all these models are called bigatures. Yeah, but it also means that these like flying aerial shots that we get that like really help solidify that like this tower is real, it is in the world, even though it looks crazy. Really helps make like fully for you to believe that like this is here. Because these models are so gigantic, they are so detailed. Well, okay, so here's the thing. So, yes and no. So, originally, they started off as, we're just going to use them as basis shots. Yeah. And then one of the days, Peter Jackson came in with I think it's called like a lipstick camera, like a lipstick lens. Yeah. So that way they can get really tight focus, and everyone's like, well, I'm glad I put more detail into this than I was hoping. Yeah, exactly. And it works. It makes these flying shots where we then transition into the actual actors really believable. It feels almost like a helicopter or a drone shot as opposed to a model shot. And that's what's great about making, like you said, this whole world feels like it exists somewhere out there. Or it existed at one time. Yeah, like if someone told me like, oh yeah, that tower's real, they filmed it in blah blah blah, I would be like, yeah, all right, sure, why not? It's an ugly building, but okay. Yeah, exactly. It's it makes me think of a lot of Frank Gehry. Yeah. Oh god damn it! I originally was just thinking of like Frank Gehry's like fucking giant fish on the side of a restaurant. Oh yeah, the giant fish. But then I started thinking of like the Guggenheim and stuff where it's very much monolithic and it's interpretive. In a bullshittiest sort of way. Yeah. It's art for people who don't want art. The very pretentious elves of our world. Yeah. Yeah. But Saruman, and I understand how people can have difficulties remembering who's who when so many of them have so many similar names. Yeah. And multiple names. I was saying that half of them people call different things depending on who you are. Yeah, there's so many languages in this series. And then Gandalf has a nickname for every town he goes in, because heaven forbid.
Oh, Gandalf. But Saruman reveals that he has seen the Eye of Sauron through the Palantiri, and that the Nine have left Minas Morgul.
Wow, it's actually, he's bad. How would you know?
Well, it's great. I love this because we have a bunch of chaotic shots as we learn more and more about the mounting danger.
Mm-hmm.
And Jackson really did a great job here, not only with the story, but later on with the Uruk-hai and the orcs, in making them the far-reaching fingers of the evil.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as we mentioned, it's hard to see. He's the flaming eye. You can't really see him as a villain. And in the same way, Saruman is the same.
He never leaves his tower.
Exactly.
In fact, I think him walking in the grounds and then like the shot of him walking and be like, burn all of them down. I think those are the only 2 times he's even outside of his tower, and he's not even out of his own grounds.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. This man sits on his uncomfortable throne the entire time.
Yeah.
I hope he has a pillow.
I mean, I hope he... Yeah, I don't know.
He's an old man sitting on some marble. That sucks.
He's immortal.
Well,
Technically.
old people... Surely immortal asses get tired, too.
I'm sure they do. But, I mean, again, same going back to, like, video games and stuff, like... This is about the time I was getting more into Zelda, specifically with Oracle of Seasons.
Yeah.
There's enemies that are very similar where they're static, but they're terrifying because they shoot laser beams and stuff.
The laser beam shooting from the eye would have increased the danger significantly. Now that you've mentioned that, I am a little sad that the eye does not shoot laser beams.
I'm glad it doesn't.
I am too, but at the same time,
well,
if they were to mention like, hey, if you get too close to the eye, it will just burn you.
Actually, I wonder.
Because like, just go knock down the tower. Whoops.
You cannot actually.
I know you can't, but like, what's he gonna do?
Nothing.
Exactly.
Well, he'll just rebuild. So, okay, little bit of lore.
I forced you.
So, Barad-dûr, the tower that is the tower in Mordor, it was actually raised after the end of the prologue. They destroyed the tower.
Yes.
But they couldn't destroy the foundations because the tower is connected to the ring. Because the ring wasn't destroyed, they were able to build on the foundations, and the tower itself is the last remnants of Sauron's power, along with the ring, which is why he can't leave. He doesn't have a physical form in this world anymore. He is specifically only here in spirit, very much so like the Ring Wraiths.
Very true. However, it would be cool if he shot lasers from his eyeball.
Yes, it would.
Yeah.
But that would be Star Wars.
It would.
And it'd be like wizards shooting lightning from their fingers.
Speaking of wizards shooting lightning from their fingers, Peter Jackson now has to figure out how to make 2 old men wizards fight.
Wizard fights!
And make it look cool, but no laser fingers, damn it.
Dude, they did such a good job with this scene. This is
every time one of these old guys hits the floor, you're like, oh, my ribs.
Yeah.
Oh, my hip.
We've learned of Sauron's betrayal at this point, but basically, my thought is, they took what every LARPer thinks their fights are like.
Yes, 110%.
Yes.
And, like, there are multiple scenes where, like, if you take out the dramatic music, if you take out the potential death, and you take out the, like, real thud noises of old man bones on concrete.
No. Take out all the music, just make it only old man thudding, and just, like, the ooh, ooh.
Like, especially the scene where Gandalf is, like, spinning in a circle.
Yes.
Like, this is a little funny.
It is, but
at the same time, like, even when I have seen this movie so many times, and I am fully capable of watching this and, like, laughing at most of the movie, every single one of those blows, I feel like they hurt.
It is.
And, like, that is what makes that, but that's what makes this move from, wow, this is the dumbest, this is Kung Pao level dumb, to, okay, this is, sure, wizards in this world beat each other up with airwaves and spins.
Yeah, they're using air magic. And psychic.
They are psychic types.
Yeah. But, so Jackson was actually intentional. This is the part where in the commentary he mentions that he dislikes old dudes shooting lightning out of their fingers.
It was a very clear jab at Star Wars.
Yeah, but here's...
so his response was to have them spin and breakdance on the floor.
Yeah, which, I mean...
Arguably both are dumb, Peter Jackson.
I mean, I won't say that I have not spun my cat on the floor before.
I have also tried to force choke my cats.
Yeah.
So, like...
It's
yeah, like... both fighting styles, cool during their movie, outside of the movie, both are dumb.
Exactly.
And now we're going to put the Gandalf prisoner in the only logical place to put a prisoner. On the roof.
Yeah. Also, this fight scene was nominated for Best Fight or Film Fight up by MTV that year.
You know, only because of what other stuff was on, I will let that slide.
Yep.
There wasn't a whole lot of fighty movies this year.
I don't remember.
This movie was second for grossing of the year. Would you like to know what was first?
Yes, please.
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Really?
Really. Worldwide. Harry Potter beat this one.
Well, I know I definitely saw both these movies in Luxembourg.
I saw both of these movies in theater multiple times. Me and my friends spent every penny on these movies.
Damn.
We saw, I think we saw the Harry Potter like 3 times in theaters. And then Lord of the Rings, like one of our friends worked at a theater, so like we just kind of like go next door, watch that one too.
Oh, small town, nothing to do.
Yeah, well, we also had AMC as the headquarters in our town, so like we had some nice theaters to go watch these movies in. Yeah, sparkly floors.
Luxembourg had a nice theater.
That's good.
I don't remember what subtitle. Well, okay, so
was it in English? Did you watch this in English, or was it subtitled?
Well, okay, so interesting thing about Luxembourg's movie theater, at least the one in the Capitol and the mall.
Which we assume is still there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's there. It had it had a 2-story grocery store.
Yeah, it's probably still there.
I had kangaroo meat there for the first time.
Ooh, fancy.
Yeah. So their movie theater, oftentimes it was in the original language.
Okay, that's nice.
But with different language subtitles.
All right.
So I saw one of the Harry Potters with German subtitles.
That would be fun.
Because that's what we had at the time. Or it was dubbed in French, but with English subtitles. Weird.
Either would be fine.
Yeah, different subtitling. There was a lot to it. But oh yeah, Star Wars. I saw Star Wars Episode 2 there too. But yeah, the version I saw of Harry Potter, which confused me a little, the first time I saw it in the U.S. was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Yeah.
Yeah. Us dumb Americans don't know what philosophers do.
Yeah, copywriting.
Well, that
was the reason for its change. But yeah, I mean, I honestly love this fight. It's dope.
Oh, it is fantastic. My favorite though is it ends with just on the roof,
just being flung up.
Yeah, and like you have no context of how they actually get up there.
Are you kidding me?
It's the most magic piece of this whole thing.
Yeah, they don't really because
there's no trapdoor up there.
Through the window, he just
floats himself up there, just crawling up there like Gollum.
Yeah, but like my favorite, like that part when like he gets Gandalf's staff and it's just like boom.
Double staff. Yeah, it's
double wielding.
Pretty cool.
It's a dope fight.
That and like once we're on the top, the fight's still going, even though at this point, fight's over theoretically. Now I'm just trying to convince you that I am the superior way. You should join my cause.
That's a little later. Yeah. That's in a flashback down the line.
Yeah, but like, it's still so cool.
It is.
Dangling from the edge of the tower.
Yep. And so, from the wizard fight, we get the we back to Frodo and Samwise, and we get the haphazard appearance of Merry and Pippin, who have stolen Farmer Maggot's crops.
Dear sweet Merry and Pippin, and your idiocracy.
Yep, they're dipshittery.
They truly are. And as we run away from what we assume is Farmer Maggot, who we only see his little scythe bobbing up and down.
It is Farmer Maggot. They say, "You've been in Farmer Maggot's crops again, aren't you?"
Yeah, but at the same time, if Farmer Maggot had like set up a little rig that just like waved his scythe up and down,
yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, they make Farmer Maggot more of an asshole in this movie.
They do, but also it seems like they do this a lot.
Yeah. Well, they say, well, it could be the cabbage we stole last week. Could have been this. Could have been that.
They are stealing everything this man has.
Yeah. But on their run, they fall off a cliff, which reminds me a little bit of the hot rod fall.
It does. This is also one of the few scenes where someone got hurt early in the movie. One of the stunt doubles fell just a little bit wrong, something that should have gone normal, totally fine, and dislocated his shoulder.
Oh, minimal.
Still had to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
But they were all like, we were so careful for this whole movie. We had almost no accidents. We were really careful about all of the actors trying stuff. Those who
except for Vigo.
That was his own damn fault. He was not told to kick the rock.
Yeah.
And then the other people who got hurt were doing it on their own off time and like then just had to live with their stupidity during scenes.
Yep.
So, like, it really, like, bummed Jackson out a little bit. He's like, I'm glad he's okay. I'm glad that, like, it wasn't super serious. But really, you fell from, like, 2 feet.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, that's enough to kill sometimes.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
But I also love that this just continues the force of the hobbits driving them food. There's the dick joke, but
yeah,
it's quickly looked over, and the poop joke of like, oh shit, we almost fell.
They are
close to poop.
So funny.
But I love the moment, like they get their grounds like mushrooms,
and all of them, with the exception of Frodo, who we've proven by this point is paranoid to an extent. Like, he's on a mission, Gandalf told him to, gotta get to Rivendell, and then everything will be fine and go home.
Well, and to be fair, Frodo's the only one who's kind of seen the darker side of it.
Yes, he's definitely the only one who knows that Gandalf is scary. Yeah,
exactly. But, yeah, for the first movie and a half, for a good chunk of them, for the Hobbits, still very carefree.
Yeah.
But they're forced off the road because of a ring wraith that's now on them.
I love the the pulled perspective of the road at this point. I know it's tropey. I know a lot of other movies do it, but it feels so right.
Yeah, and Jackson does it in a couple places quite well. And I think the next time we really see it is in Shelob's lair, but he does it tactfully.
Yes.
It's not to be comedic. It's not to be cheesy.
He knows that this is done in other scenes and other movies specifically. He's like, I know that, but like this is the way to like emphasize this approaching like sense of danger.
Yeah. Also, fun fact about this first wraith, it's Andy Serkis who would later embody Gollum.
Yeah.
As a ring wraith.
I mean, delightfully spooky.
But also, so a lot of people mention like, oh, why doesn't the wraith just get down there and look around? Well, the wraiths can't exactly see the ring. The wraiths don't live in this world anymore.
No, they are on a different plane of existence.
The cloth is just there to give them some type of physical form, and they can only see the world during the daytime and through their mouths.
Yes. That's why they're so smelly.
Yes. And well, also they just can't, I don't think that even at nighttime they can see the world, but that's why they are always on a mount, is that's how they can see the world.
Yes. And also the bugs scurrying away, A, disgusting. B, meant that the casting crew had to watch hours of footage of different bugs moving and wiggling to figure out which bugs they wanted to use. And one of the casting crew, she specifically mentioned that she accidentally watched one of the centipedes eat a cricket thing. It like murdered it straight out, and she was so horrified. And she's like, all right, well, now we have to have a centipede. Look at it.
Nature.
Gross.
But so the wraiths can't 100% pin down where the ring's at. They can just sense its presence.
Yes.
Same with Sauron.
Yeah.
Until they actually physically have it in their hands, they can't see it.
Yeah. Or Frodo being a dumbass.
Yeah, because Frodo's very tempted to. He's starting to feel the call. He's able to resist the most at this point.
Yes.
But then they go on the run, and they jump across to Ferry, which is their last hope.
Their last hope. And the jump is Elijah actually doing his own stunt here. And a lot of them were really worried about it because they're like, this is pretty dangerous. Are you sure? And he's like, I got it.
And he got a splinter.
He got a poor splinter in his foot.
Yes, and
But it looks really good.
Well, he also mentioned in the commentary that he was acting like it was the most painful thing ever. Like, oh, it's got to be this big, and it's a
like
little
a
dinky
teeny
thing.
one, yeah.
And they all gave him shit for it.
Yeah, but this jump, even though, like, A, he's a small person jumping onto a raft that is slowly debarking from a, like, in the reality of the situation, not that impressive a feat, he makes it look really good. Like, this is a cool shot.
It is. And also in this shot, we get to see a little side note for me, the fairy house, which is the last little bit of architecture we'll see in the Shire.
Yeah, and it's the last, like, truly rounded... It's not even all rounded, but it's the most rounded thing we're going to see for a while. It's
very much like the architecture of men, but with hints of Hobbiton.
Yeah.
But it's nice to show a little bit of connection, because we'll see a little bit in Bree, and Bree is the last little reference we'll see to Hobbits.
Yes. And even the references in Bree they almost feel like afterthoughts.
Oh, no, not even that. I'll get into that. Bree is architecturally and at this point in the story, the most is pretty interesting.
Yes.
So now the party has arrived at Bree, and we're heading to the Prancing Pony. But before we really get into Bree, I love the accommodations for the Hobbit folks at the gated city.
I do too.
To show that, one, there's increased danger outside the Shire now.
Yes.
Because now we have a gated city. The Shire has no gates, as far as we're aware, besides like the doors on the houses.
And like it's implied that people don't even lock their doors.
No.
People leave their windows open while they go out to the pub.
Yeah, exactly. And so, just there's little touches here and there that's like, okay, that's a nice touch. That I'm sure I think it's in the book too, but still, it's a nice building up of the danger of like you're not in the Shire anymore.
No, the whole place feels squishy, dirty, and I love the cameo of Peter Jackson himself here. He is the man eating the carrot.
Yep.
Just random dude in the background. And like if you know what Peter Jackson looks like, you're like, oh, there he is. But if you aren't like actively looking for him, he's just a gross side person eating a carrot.
Most of the time too. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. But in our first look at Bree, it's definitely a newer world of men. It's of European vernacular, similar to the Tudor style. Yep. That we very much associate with the likes of the Middle Ages style.
It is very Middle Agey.
The design team was going more for a bit of a Gothic feeling, which they do. Yeah. It's the kind of details we see as like the default fantasy settings in RPGs and JRPGs.
It is much closer to a Renaissance fair style than Hobbiton is.
Yeah, and at times it's a simple architecture that brings down to a more utilitarian design. Yeah. Rather than the ornamentation we see in later designs in like the grand halls and everything. Yeah. But also at this point,
very Skyrim-y.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very much that feel to it. Yeah. But at this point, it's also a good introduction to the ranger we know as Strider, and the use of parallel action between building the Wraiths' attempts to kill the Hobbits and everything else. Yes. Also, it's of note that Bree is a town of mainly men, but also Hobbits.
Yeah, there's some Hobbits who have decided to, like, join the world.
Yes, and that's why it's not out of place where he says, oh, we've got accommodations for you. There's Hobbit-sized beds.
Yes, cute little baby beds.
Yes. But also, it doesn't, the Hobbits don't feel out of place yet.
No one's looking at them like they are the crazy ones.
No, well, and because people have dealt with the Hobbits, obviously.
Yeah, and in the books they mention that, like, there's lots of half Hobbit, half men in the town. Mm-hmm. Most of the, like, proper Shire folk think of the Hobbits and Bree as, like, not proper. Yeah. Hobbits, they've forgotten their ways of Hobbity.
Yeah, but they're also the only connections really to the outside world and like bringing trade in.
They still want the tea and gossip from them. They just, don't want to associate with them.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also a good point to talk about Strider, who is played by the always fantastic Viggo Mortensen.
Yes. One of his greatest roles, really.
And normally I won't really go into the casting because everyone they chose was their first picks. Yes. Elijah Wood sent in his videotape, and the moment Peter Jackson saw it, he's like, that's Frodo. Yeah. There was no one else in his mind. Same with Samwise. Yep. I think Merry and Pippin were pretty much the same too. Mm-hmm. And everyone they got who they wanted for the most part. But Viggo had 3 days Mortensen had 3 days to accept the role after Jackson realized that they had cast someone way too young with Stuart Townsend. Yeah. And basically Viggo got the call and he's like, hey, are you interested in doing this role? We think you'd be perfect. And he's like, well, how many days? He's like, well, I need to know as soon as possible, and then we need to get you a plane ticket to New Zealand like tomorrow morning. I will mail it to you first class. And so what actually got Mortensen into it, he was probed by his son who was asking like what he wanted to do. His son was a Lord of the Rings nerd.
Giant Lord of the Rings nerd.
And he ended up being a consultant and helped develop the map that's shown in Bilbo's study.
Yes. And when his son heard that he was going to play Aragorn, he was like, Dad, you have to. This is the character.
Yeah. He's like, okay, I can. All right, whatever.
And then after getting his part, morphed himself into goddamn Aragorn.
Oh, yeah. So Mortensen is a method actor.
Very much so.
And he got into the role and he workshopped his own costume, to be very flexible as a man who travels, self-repaired everything.
Yes.
Made the sleeves detachable. He even carried like a whetstone, and he described himself as being Rasputin looking.
Yeah. And then on top of that, everyone else had a little bit more time to weapons train than he did before joining the set.
Yeah.
And so to help what he felt catch him up to what Aragorn would have been, he took his sword everywhere with him.
Trained with it, and on top of that, like he carried what else did he do? He went full on into the role.
He really was like immersed in it.
Yeah.
It was very impressive, and you can tell because like we're about to come up on most of the like first like true Aragorn scenes, and they're good. But once we get to the second and third movie, you can really see how he's fully come into that character.
Yeah. And on top of that, like, he had never read the books before. He read them on the flight over to New Zealand.
Which is some power reading if I've ever seen it.
Which, last I checked, it's like $8,000 to fly to New Zealand right now. Yeah.
I mean, when you're making a movie that made about $880 million its first year.
$1 million.
Like, I feel like we can afford a plane ticket.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is also pre-COVID, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a little easier to fly.
A little bit. But yeah, so I think his role is probably one of the best in the movie.
Oh, yes.
And for the first time, the party is now in real direct danger instead of like haphazardly traveling. Yeah, the Nazgul was chasing them, but...
They were in charge of themselves.
Yeah.
Now we truly see the stupidity of Merry and Pippin.
Oh yeah, because I mean now they have a guide, but he's like, "What are you guys doing? We got to keep going." And they're like, "But it's second breakfast."
Yes.
But and then I don't know. What do you think about luncheon or whatever the hell they call it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also an interesting thing because Aragorn has been protecting the Shire. That's part of the Rangers' duty is to make sure that nothing bad happens to the Shire. The Shire is very much like a nature preserve in this world.
Yeah, they very much... and the Hobbits know that the Rangers are doing this.
No, most of them don't.
Most of them don't, but it's not like, wow, everybody doesn't know. Like, definitely the uppers know. The Thane knows. And it's kind of one of those things where they're like, yeah, they feel like they've got to, so, like, we let them.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
But I also like it because it shows that Aragorn is protecting them, but he doesn't know their basic customs.
No, he really does not understand Hobbit.
No. Also, the snow is not planned for this part.
No, they just were like, well, we get to film with snow.
Yep.
Gotta do it. Gotta keep going.
Yeah, and so as they rest at nightfall, Strider shows he's being really a man.
Yeah.
He's being the manly man because he's bringing home a deer over his shoulder.
This was his own idea.
Which is great. I mean, because everyone brings that little bit, I feel he brought that level of realism. He's like, well, someone's got to be providing for these hobbits. Like, they can't hunt. They can't do any of this stuff.
And we physically cannot carry enough sausage and bacon to feed these guys.
Yeah, and this is also before Lembas, too.
Yeah. Which... if it was up to the hobbits, still wouldn't last them that long.
No, because they ate 4 of them in the first go.
They haven't even left yet.
Yeah. But it's a good building moment just also to show that as much as Frodo loved the Shire, he's quite a bit more worldly because he understands that
he's at least been like educated in other customs.
Strider is, I was blanking on his name for a second. He knows that Strider's singing in Elvish, and he knows he's singing about a woman. Yeah,
like it's clear that like out of everyone, Frodo is by far the most like worldly educated.
Bilbo taught him a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But from here we cut to Sauron getting a promotion.
Oh, yay! There was no one above him.
Guidance from Mordor, and now we get the soiling of Isengard.
Which... terrible, but looks so cool.
Poor Gandalf above, like a puppy left in the rain.
He's very sad, very cold, very wet.
And so I want to talk about this part a little bit, because Tolkien vehemently has stated that it is not a World War II allegory. Or World War I allegory either.
Which is fair. It's his work, he can tell you what he wants about it. But a lot of people pull the connection. And it's hard not to have connections when you live through it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like... it's very much not a story about World War II. It's a story about this world that has parallels.
Yes.
But it's not the story of that war.
No.
More so, and what's great is he sets it so far from events. The last alliance of elves and men in the battle that ended the Second Age, the prologue, that probably is their World War One.
Oh, for sure.
Their World War II, basically.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason why people are so ready to jump at the similarities between real history and the Lord of the Rings events is partially because even Tolkien made sure that this fantasy world felt real.
Exactly.
And part of feeling real is having realistic war. And he knew what that looked like. He knew what the preparation for that looked like. He knew it just didn't mean like, all right, call the troops, time to assemble the guard. Like, he knew it meant like building an infrastructure. It meant creating weapons. It meant physically creating an army to be ready for war.
Yep. Yeah, it's very much the build up to the World Wars,
yes.
The militarization and arms race.
Exactly. And so it's easy to make those connections when the connections are there because he lived it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on top of that, like, design-wise, all the structures feel temporary, and they're built, like, in a haphazard manner, like, everything's scabbed together.
And it no longer has the tower before. While I feel ugly, you could make the argument of it being like a regal tower. Mm-hmm. It has some architecturalness to it. Everything around it no longer feels purposeful. It feels like it is there for function.
Yes.
Solely for function.
Exactly. And also, fun fact, it rained for 2 weeks, so it made it great for tearing down the trees.
Yeah, which, yes, they did tear down the trees. I'm sorry.
I think it was one fake one they made.
Okay, so I know they've done at least two, because there's one tree that they pull down and they show it several times being pulled down.
Yeah, it's reused.
It's reused a lot, and they're like, we didn't want to pull down too many. But the tree that the hobbits hide under when they're being chased, that was a tree out of some guy's farm, and they chopped it and moved it. And so, like, we know at least 2 trees lost their lives in the filming of this movie.
Oh, no.
Honestly, for how many trees fall down, pretty good. Yeah. I'll take it.
But yeah, just a great show of their skill as not graphic designers, film effects and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah, now we arrive at a destroyed watchtower of Weathertop, also known as Amansur.
Yes. Very fancy.
In regards to the watchtower, it is truly the first ruins of the old world we see, because Orthanc is still intact.
Yeah.
It's overgrown, but it's still intact as far as we're aware. But it's the bones of an ancient architecture that we'll see more and more in the movie that's from the Númenórean people and the Dunedain as we get closer and closer to Mordor.
Yeah.
But it's also, this tower is important because it was one of the seats of the Palantiri were held.
Yes.
And I'll get into the Palantiri later.
Yeah. The thing that's really nice about it, though, is it's not just ruins. Like, it is briefly mentioned, I think it's in the extended version, Aragorn briefly mentions that, like, the history of this place is still remembered.
Yeah.
They don't know everything about it, but, like, they know what it used to be called. They know what it was. Mm-hmm. Nobody lives here anymore. It is ruins, but, like, it's not like, oh, yeah, there's just ruins. And, like, no one knows anything about the long-gone people of this world. Like, they know.
Yeah.
And, like, that makes it so much more believable as opposed to, like, a lot of fantasy worlds where it's like, we have completely forgotten the past. No one's truly forgotten anything except Galadriel.
She has forgotten what she wants to forget.
Yeah.
I remember those days in the First Age. I was a wild elf.
She remembers those, but she can't remember where she put the ring.
Well, it wasn't her fault.
I blame her anyway.
It's not her fault. It's Isildur's fault.
Yeah, I blame him too.
If you had just thrown it in, we wouldn't have had these movies. But one thing I do want to mention that I like that Peter Jackson has revealed that he's like, well, at one point we were going to do this or we were going to do that. Mm-hmm. He had thought about putting text at the bottom of the screen just saying where stuff was at.
And I can understand that because there is a lot of locations in Middle-earth. And, like, even though he condenses this movie down a lot, we still go through a lot of places that in the books have names. A lot of these passes and hills have names. And we don't have time for that. Yeah,
well, and that's the thing I like that he didn't do it too, is because at the end of the day, it's a set of ruins. We don't give a shit. It doesn't, like he said, they removed everything that doesn't aid in Frodo's story.
Yes.
Which, speaking of aiding in the story, the Hobbits done fucked up.
Yeah, just a little bit.
And it shows that they're very unassuming of the danger that's around. Even though they've seen a Nazgul.
They don't understand how to not put themselves in danger.
No, they don't.
They really don't.
Well, we're going to cook some stuff.
This is how you cook things.
Jackson did mention that a UK critic poo-pooed on this moment because they used potatoes and tomatoes, which were a New World crop. Because the critic's a wet towel.
The critic is a wet towel, but also tomatoes and potatoes were in the book, so, like, fuck you.
Yeah.
Also, this is Middle Earth, not the real world.
Exactly.
There could be potatoes wherever they want.
But I do love the Nazgul, which is another name for the 9 that's mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Just in a misty shot of them coming out of, like, the darkness.
Yes. Like, they feel incredibly horror movie-esque.
Yeah.
Especially in this scene where Frodo puts the ring on.
Mm-hmm.
And we can now truly see what they look like in their dimension. Or they're veiled. Like, they're unveiled.
Yeah.
Like, that is where I think his background in horror really shines through. Because they are ghostly. They are truly horrific.
Yes. Yeah, they are
They are
wraiths.
dead.
They're wraiths.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like it's not like an interpretation of a ghost. It's not like an interpretation of like an undead.
Mm-hmm.
He visually created something that I didn't think someone could make.
No.
Because their descriptions in the book aren't detailed enough for you to be like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They're just kind of given like a broad brush. Or like their actions are described more than they themselves.
Yeah.
And like their faces are so ghastly. It's perfect.
Yeah.
It truly makes them scary.
Fleshy and bony at the same time.
And like eyes, but no eyes.
Yeah. No. And also like in this moment too, because the hobbits really are useless. Like,
yes.
Because
I appreciate the effort, but they are useless.
Yeah, the Nazgul just shoved them aside and stabbed Frodo.
Which, I mean, saw that coming.
But it also shows that Strider, for the most part, we've been leery of him, really. But this is really the part where he shows his badassery as he fights off the Nazgul.
Yes.
And
while this fight scene is totally badass, unfortunately, the actor did not have time to take any sword fighting lessons. So this is him improving, kind of.
This is his very first scene he shot.
Yes. They were like, get off the plane, here's your outfit, here's a sword, go.
Yeah.
And I think this right here, for me, is where you see the greatest development of him and this character. Because this fight scene's good.
Yeah.
This fight scene's really fun to watch. I love it. It does not feel like Aragorn, though.
No.
It still feels a little bit like a ranger.
Yeah, it's because he still is a ranger. He's not Aragorn yet.
Yes, which I will give you that. But especially once we get to like the end of this movie, and we get to see a better fight of him, and he's already improved so much with how to hold the sword, how to hold himself, how to two-hand weapon in a way.
Yep.
Like, this scene's cool, but it's a clear development.
Yeah, it's the first step. And like we said, the very first movie, if you really start analyzing it, it's quite rough.
It is, but I like it.
Yeah, I do too. But in this fight, Frodo is stabbed by the Morgul blade, which it's never fully explained in the movie.
No, but also kudos on the acting for the stabbing scene. This is one of the most like I fully believe you were stabbed. Most of the time people get stabbed or shot in movies and I'm like, bullshit, lies. You're fine. This one I'm like, 100%, that man is near Door's death.
Yep.
Get him a medic.
Well, this blade as well, because it's not explained, it's an enchanted blade that can only be used at night, because it deteriorates in the sun, because of course.
Yeah, why not?
But if it doesn't kill, the fragments start working their way towards the heart to kill.
Yes.
That's where the danger is.
Yes.
And that's why it's like, oh, he's been stabbed by a more... And here's the thing. There are some things where it's like, well, I want to know more about it. Because he got stabbed by a Morgul blade. We don't know what that does.
No.
There's nothing explained about it.
Nope. All I know is that it slowly turns him into a crusty version of himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very crusty.
Oh shit, we forgot to talk about Frodo putting on the ring.
He puts on the ring and everyone's like, Frodo, you dumbass, where did you go?
Well, even in the first one, that's how the Ring Wraiths come to Bree.
Yeah, but also, honestly, with the exception of it looking really cool, Doesn't do anything.
Cool shots.
It's a cool shot, but like, meh.
The Invisible Hobbit.
The Invisible Hobbit, and like, it's one of those things where like clearly party tricks are somewhat normal because like people are like, wow, a magician.
Yeah,
he
exactly.
disappeared. And then everyone goes right back to drinking.
Yeah.
Nobody, with the exception of Sam, Merry, and Pippin, nobody's worried about him.
And Strider.
Well, Strider is the one who kidnaps him and then takes him to his bedroom. And Sam, Merry, and Pippin are like, he's with who? He's
done
where?
Fucked up little ones.
I will beat you with this chair.
Yeah. Well, they're trying. They're doing their best.
They are doing their best.
I think that's the best thing about the Hobbits is even if they're failing, they're trying.
They do give it a try.
Yeah. And so from back to here, we go to Isengard. The orcs go to work, and Gandalf is the Moth Whisperer.
He is, once again, the Moth Whisperer.
Yeah.
And I love the commentary here because Peter Jackson had to realize that moths only live for like 2 days. And he didn't know that when they were going forwards with this fiend. So he was like, and then the moth died in his hand.
Yeah. But, I mean, we have great foraging shots with the miniatures.
It looks great. And, like, the...
birthing scenes.
The birthing scene, it is the, like, most...
Or we see the birthing pits. We haven't gotten to a full birthing scene
Yeah.
yet.
And, like, we get to see them making their weapons. And their weapons are so distinct.
Yeah.
They're crude. They're clearly not, like, smithed. They are pointy pieces of metal.
Yep.
And they're not even good pointy pieces of metal.
Oh, no.
They're, like, mass manufacturing the shit out of these things.
Yeah.
There's no craft to it.
No, it's just plug and chug.
Yes, very much.
The one thing I will say is that my only complaint about this scene is some of the CGI shots feel very much Titanic-like.
A little bit.
But not bad. They're brief.
They are very brief. The only complaint I have is that the weird blades that they have, where it's like a straight blade and then a little L at the top, looks exactly like the little keys that come with your door.
Yeah.
And so all I can think of is that these are just like little sharp pointy keys.
Yeah. Also of note, this is a nod to Radagast the Brown,
yes.
Who doesn't appear in the movie. Gandalf isn't talking, or Gandalf isn't sending a message on the moth. The moth is carrying a message.
Yes.
And Gandalf's feeding it back so that way it can go back to Radagast, who has a little bit of a role, but not as big in this movie.
Nope. And, like, we don't need him yet.
Yeah. So, but, yeah. I mean, it's a nice little nod that if you dig a little bit more.
Yeah. Like, it's not like a magic moth. I mean, it is, but it's not, like, more magical than you thought.
Yeah. And now the group is resting on Bilbo's stone trolls.
I do appreciate the stone trolls.
Yeah, he's trying to find something to heal them. But, oh no, a ranger cut off his guard.
Oh, so sexy.
It comes in Arwen, who is portrayed by Liv Tyler.
And does the best job in this goddamn movie.
And I did not realize until I was doing digging that she is the daughter of Steven Tyler of Aerosmith.
Yes. Yes, she is. But also, like, they spent so much time harping on the fact that she was the perfect fit for Arwen. Mm-hmm. Not only did she, like, embody the gliding and the, like, ethereal, just 1,000-year-old elf perfectly, she had a real gift for speaking Elvish.
Yeah.
And so, like, she learned all of the lines she could in Elvish, and, like, they'd be like, that was it. That was perfect. One take. Yeah.
Well, and on top of that, she had to deepen her voice for some of this because her natural voice is really high and airy.
But she's the one who decided that, like, the Elvish should be spoken in a deeper, softer voice. And they're like, that's perfect. That's what makes it more ethereal. That's what makes it old and, like, almost out of touch with the world. Yeah,
and one thing I also like is that Peter Jackson kept stuff simplified to Elvish and standard English.
Yeah.
The common tongue.
We didn't bother trying to learn Dwarvish for this, thank God.
Because dwarves have their own language, the orcs have their own language.
There's a couple versions of Elvish.
There's multiple versions of Elvish. There's the Mordor language, the Dark Speech. There's multiple human languages. Rohan has their own language. But
it's mostly just horse name.
But there's common tongue.
Yeah.
And that's what they're using.
And that just makes everything so much easier.
Yeah. But it is time for the chase, which Jackson filmed this like it was a car chase.
And it looks so good. It feels so epic despite it just being a horse chase.
Yeah.
And, like, I love Westerns, we know that.
Mm-hmm.
Horse chases 9 times out of 10 are boring as, like, absolutely boring.
Yeah.
Because your horse is either faster or it's not faster.
Well,
but because he did it in a forest, there's turns, there's quick
Mm-hmm.
moves. The horse has a turbo drive on it, damn it.
Yeah, well, it's also cool, too, because it's Jackson pulling... We've already talked about, like, how much it feels like he pulled from his horror days.
Mm-hmm.
It's pulling from a different genre that
Yes.
we don't normally see.
And while it's not a super direct iteration, the moment you know that he was attempting car chase-esque, suddenly the weaving in and out of the trees instead of like letting your very fast horse run in a straight line, which would arguably be the more efficient way to have a horse chase, especially since we know her horse is faster.
But not much faster.
Once she speaks Elvish turbo mode towards it, it is.
Well, and I mean, it shows elves' affinity to nature.
Yeah, and also just arrogance.
Yeah.
Delightful, beautiful arrogance.
I know you can go faster. You've been holding back, haven't you, bitch?
That's exactly the Elvish she used. I have no doubt of it.
But they get to a ford where she's across the river. Shit, what was it? I think it was Sugi posted something. Someone made a meme of it from like, The Mummy. Where it's like, we're on the wrong side of the river.
I got the horses. I'm on the right side of the river.
Yeah. But I like this scene because the water itself is a force of nature.
Yes.
Mixing in the horses is kind of cool.
I like it because it
adds something more dynamic than just, oh, here's a great flood, guys.
It also, like, keeps the audience from wondering if, like, wow, what timing did a dam break upstream or something?
Yeah.
Like, this feels more intentional, more specific to this moment.
Well, and it also shows, like, the little bit of magic the elves have.
Yes.
Because of note, I'm glad they did it this way. Elrond is actually the one who summons the flood.
Yes. And it's the magic of the water, not necessarily him.
Yeah.
But they're asking its permission. It's a mess. Jackson knows all that. Deal with it.
Yeah, and he's the first blatant bearer of the Elvish rings that we'll see.
Yeah.
But I do like that they showed Arwen doing it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's like, oh, you gotta cut to a random mouth saying shit.
And, like, we haven't really been introduced to him yet.
No, not at all.
Like, he's in the intro scene, but, like, you don't know anything about him. He just gets a ring.
Yep. And so, now we cut to, Frodo passes out.
Frodo might be dead. He's very crusty looking.
Yeah, he wakes up in Rivendell and is reunited with Gandalf, and we learn of Gandalf's plight.
Poor Gandalf has been stuck on a rooftop.
Yeah, this is the part where he's hanging over the edge.
It's
Join
so cool.
us.
It's so cool.
I'm trying to think of what's... I know there's something it might have been a Mortal Kombat kill I saw.
It does feel a little Mortal Kombat-y in, like, the epic, like, finish him sort of style.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a cool scene. We get introduced to the eagles. Gandalf flies away.
We now have no doubt in our mind that the other wizard is, in fact, terribly bad.
He's been corrupted.
He wants nothing but power, and Gandalf lets him know that that is foolish.
Right. I can't remember. I don't think they actually used the line in the movie. But he's gone from... He's no longer Sauron the White. He's Sauron the Multicolored or whatever.
I don't think in the movie they say, but in the book they mention that he's like, I'm next level, bitch. XP for days.
I am
murdered
all
trees.
the wizards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's some rivalry because Gandalf was the original pick for the 5 wizards or leader of the 5 wizards. And
then they were like, you spend a lot of time with hobbits. A little weird.
Well, that happened after the fact.
Yeah, well, hobbies are... fickle things.
Yes. But we're reunited with Samwise. We get to see a little bit of his growth because now he's seen like, hey, my actions fucked up and almost killed my master.
Yes. Sam feels very sad about all this.
Yeah, because, I mean...
Merry and Pippin are, doing their own thing.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we haven't gotten to their growth yet.
No, not at all. They don't grow for a long time either.
And now we get to my favorite tiny detail.
What's that?
The rapid aging of Bilbo.
Yes. Yeah.
The just absolute, he is just... Because in the books, he has a lot more time to rapidly age.
Yes.
He's still old as shit, but now he's 122 or something like that? Almost 130? But not in the movie. In the movie, we've condensed all this down, and he went from having it 1 minute to not the next. And now he's withering away in front of our eyes.
Yep.
But he also writes crazy fast.
Oh yeah, he's interesting. It is a nice little detail that we do see later down the line too.
Yes, it also like I don't know. This really like helps solidify that like the ring is what was holding him together.
Yep.
Like it really like extinguishes the doubt in your mind that like because we don't really know like they mention like how long hobbits live, but Bilbo's kind of our only one that we like truly can be like, yep, that's an old ass hobbit.
Yeah.
There's not like a bunch of old hobbits at the birthday party.
Oh, no, he is the oldest. Yeah, now that you point that out, everyone else, like, there's some that look older, but none of them are, like, grayish hair like he is.
Nobody's, like, walking with a cane real slow, like.
No, that's a good point out. I didn't catch that. Also, I did forget to mention my favorite line of the Gandalf's plight.
Yes.
So you have chosen death.
Yes, it's very dramatic.
It's so metal.
It is so good.
Also, I like this point too because at this point the hobbits are now looking forward to going home. They've had their little excursion out of the Shire. They've had their danger. They've done their journey to the Misty Mountains.
Yeah, and like you can't blame them because especially the way Peter Jackson decided to film this, the reunion of all the hobbits back in bed, the reunion of Frodo and Bilbo feels like the end of a story.
Yeah.
It feels like the end of a chapter. It's closed. Somebody else's problem now. Time for us all to head home.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll stick around, have a good, like, vacation in Rivendell.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll head home and be like, guys, we walked all the way to Rivendell. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, we didn't go as far as Bilbo, but we got pretty far, guys.
We got pretty far. We saw him. He's doing great.
Yeah.
He's retired.
Well, it's also an interesting, we also, in between this stuff, we get the building of the darkness from Saruman.
Mm-hmm.
We learn that he's breeding an army, but he's also following in the footsteps of Sauron, and by extension, Melkor, by corrupting the creations of Eru Iluvatar by breeding orcs and men and goblins.
Yes.
And
mud.
Yeah, so...
Just covering them in mud.
Real quick, I did throw a bunch of lore in there.
Yes.
Quick summary, and I've talked about this character. Eru Iluvatar is the divine creator in Lord of the Rings. Melkor was one of the first beings created by Eru, and they're called the Valar, who are supposed to craft and guide the world under the design of Eru, but he turned aside and turned to creating his own shit, but can't craft from nothing, so like Eru, and therefore... is left to corrupt what's created.
Yes.
So now of note, Sauron was a servant of Melkor, or primordial spirit being also known as the Maiar that were meant to serve the Valar. He is the same kind of being as Gandalf, Saruman, and later what we'll see, the Balrogs.
Yes.
Design note, we get a little bit more, but goblins and orcs are designated to be pointed and spiky and menacing. Like you said with the armor, there's nothing like it else in the world.
Yeah.
But their armor also has no backing.
No. To
show that they're not going to run away. But they do later.
Yes. But at the same time, it also kind of proves that like they know they are dispensable. Yeah. They are ants in this battle. And Jackson wanted them to feel like they were dispensable. Yes. And he did a great job with that. Very especially much. In showing like their mass production. They're so mass produced that their own armor looks like it's not going to hold together. Yeah. Like their helmets look like maybe they could take like a hit. Yep. And then like, yeah, you're dead. Yeah, exactly. None of their armor's like full body armor. Not even the like chief ones get full body armor. Nope. Like, the chief ones get almost no armor. Yeah, which is interesting. Yeah. It's kind of like showing off of, like, hey, I'm not wearing armor, you bitches. Yeah. Yeah, it's a strange design choice. Yeah. But it makes sense because it's like, hey, if our leader goes missing, not a problem. One of you folks take it. Doesn't matter. Yeah. We're going. Well, that's what happens quite a bit here and there. And we see it play out in Shadow of Mordor in the game. But... now it is time to mention Elrond. Oh, dear sweet Elrond. Who is portrayed by Hugo Weaving, who is the uncle of Samara Weaving, who is in Ready or Not that we reviewed. Very good. Very good. Yeah, so they're all getting tied together slowly. But Rivendell is rather church-like. It is very church-like. But it's tastefully overgrown with the foliage. It feels... very much like at one point it was high and lofty, and since we have learned a little bit of a lesson. Yeah. Not a lot of lesson, but a little bit. Yeah. And so design-wise, it's very Art Nouveau. Very. But more concrete, like Antonio Gaudi. Yes. And but unlike Gaudi, who drew a lot of his
inspiration,
but where he drew his inspiration from like animal bones, rib cages, and spines, and like the actual like human and animal movement, the elves all seem to have inspired themselves from like vines and ferns.
Are you thinking of Caltrava?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, Caltrava did the bones and spine. He does that theater that's the eye with the water.
Yes.
Yeah, that's Caltrava, where like his other building looks like a bull and section cut.
I think so.
Yeah, Gaudi is very organic. He's the guy who did Sagrada de Familia.
Yeah, still very bone and like it look like, especially the inside if you ever get to see it.
It's inspired by trees.
Yes.
But material looking wise, I see what you're getting at
like
now.
The elf version of it, you can look at and go tree. Yes, 100%. Whereas with his work, a lot of it, yes, tree-esque, but also tree in the most like bone sense.
Okay, the very basic form idea.
Yeah, like it's been boiled down quite a lot. Whereas the elf one feels a lot more like direct inspiration. Like the arch up to everything feels a lot like, yes, it's clean and yes, everything's very symmetrical, but like it feels much more like
it's a little more elaborate than Gaudi in points.
Yes.
Okay. And so for those unfamiliar, because we've been throwing around a lot of architectural terms and vernacular, because architecture and all these stuff has terms, and a lot of people aren't familiar with them. They can throw, it looks Art Nouveau, it looks like this. Art Nouveau was a highly decorative art movement that came into fashion around and before the turn of the 20th century that pulled from late Baroque, Rococo, Gothic Revival, and it was heavily influential in part of the arts and crafts movement, as well as the Celtic Revival, and it incorporated a lot of use of the Chinese and Japanese arts, which we hadn't really seen at this point.
No, they were considered foreign.
And as such, there are various styles of elvish architecture that does not clearly fit into any of these styles exactly, much as we saw in the Hobbit world.
Yes.
Noted that in the coming up with the design of the elvish architecture was aimed at ever perfecting and minimalistic Art Nouveau and with some Celtic influences.
Yes, and I would say that whether or not they meant to, the way that it sits on the hill and with the waterfall feels very Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yes.
Feels incredibly Frank Lloyd Wright. Whereas Art Nouveau always sits in a city, it feels like. It always feels like it's surrounded by busy and energy. This one is like purposefully placed and nestled into the into nature, which was Frank Lloyd Wright to a T.
And I will get into a little bit of contrasting, probably, I think in the next episode is where I have it listed.
Okay.
But the development team stated that they wanted them to feel like rooms without walls.
They succeeded. There's no privacy in this place.
But with that, it's also made Rivendell akin to the Shire, but more ruin-like instead of being at one with nature.
It definitely feels like something where the hobbits would appreciate it, but not necessarily feel homely in it.
Yeah, exactly. And even the men appreciate it.
Yes, it feels very much like a fine piece of art. Feels very museum or church-esque. Something that's easy to appreciate and see the grandeur of it, but you wouldn't want to live there.
Yeah.
Except for the elves who are living there for some reason. And
for me, I think they did a good job for the most part. And when they say rooms without walls, the interiors still feel heavy and ornate. But it also what makes it feel tied to the other races.
Yes.
Because their ornate is quite different. And even then, most of the rooms feel more like circular corridors because they're open above and there's like a courtyard.
And there's so many passages through things. Like nothing seems to have like a dead end almost.
Yeah. And even then the architectural model was designed around trees.
Yes. Very much.
So they felt it was very much so like they were trying to encompass the nature and not change it. They were trying to be part of it but be separate at the same time.
It feels like architecture that was based off of flow and path and travel first, and then form and then function at the bottom of that chain.
And even Elrond's house is also kind of a library at times.
Even though that's supposed to be like his quarters, it still feels like a study. It doesn't feel like a house necessarily. Yeah, and also of note, the fresco in the background was done by Alan Lee. It's very nice. Yeah. And after all of this, we are introduced to Boromir, who is... dear sweet, stupid Boromir.
portrayed by the fabulous Sean Bean.
He did a great job, especially since they kept changing his goddamn lines on him.
Yeah, exactly. At the council, like, there's parts I didn't catch them. I don't know if they corrected it or they just edited well enough, and Jackson was just referring to some stuff they cut. But, like, there are parts where he looks down real quick because he's trying to make sure he's reading the lines properly.
They had given it to him, like, the night before or, like, that morning, and he's like, well, I'm going to put this on my lap.
Yeah. But this is an important part because, one, we have two... this is really the first the other men we're really introduced to. And he, at heart, he has the same generational burden as Aragorn, but he doesn't carry the Isildur gene or whatever.
He's not one of the last lines of that type of men. Yeah,
exactly. And we also get to know that, hey, Aragorn's not just some random ranger. He's a little bit more important than we want to know.
And
than he wants to know.
And he's also not as perfect as we had imagined him to be. He's not like the savior gone rogue.
No.
He's actively running from a responsibility.
Exactly. And from here we cut to Arwen, who's given Aragorn the Elven Star and the beginning of the driving romance between the two.
Yes. Her namesake.
Yeah. And I like to point out one thing. She is so important to it. I mean,
she is.
But also, it's not really mentioned in the books, but they are distant cousins.
Oh yeah, no, they're definitely related.
Even though,
and he grew up here, so she kind of got to watch him grow up. So, like, it's a little weird.
And also, he was sent away because Elrond found out that they were in love, and he's like, "No, you're going to be a ranger in the north.
Bye.
Peace."
Yeah, a little awkward.
Yeah, and to give a little bit of history, Elrond is the brother of the guy who became the king, he was an elf who gave up his immortality to become one of the men.
Yes.
And he is the founder of the Númenóreans.
Yes.
And so, and was the first king of the Númenóreans, which gave them their long lifetime.
Special people.
Before their fall and everything. And so that's Aragorn's great grandfather, who was an elf, who's not an elf anymore.
Somehow removed.
Complicated.
But, like, also not complicated enough.
Yeah, so Arwen is his great aunt in some way.
Yeah, okay, less distant on her side. That's the problem.
Yeah.
If it was as distant on her side, I'd be less weirded out, I think.
They make a very nice rectangle in the family tree.
His branch is way down here, and hers is way up here.
Yeah.
It's awkward.
But
they leave it out of the movie, which is very tasteful.
If you didn't know that, you wouldn't know that they're cousin fuckers.
You know what? There's not a lot of romance in this movie.
Have a field day, adult industry. That is a very common thing now, I guess.
This movie has a lot to offer with her anyway, so...
Yes.
She wears a lot of see-through dresses.
And now we are on to the Council of Elrond.
Yes. Which feels very impractical.
Where we are introduced to Gimli, who is portrayed by John Rhys Davies, and had the hardest time with makeup.
Poor man.
He would spend 4.5 hours, and he was allergic to it, so...
It itched like hell.
And I think they said for every day of shooting they had with him, he had to have 3 days off to recover.
Which sucks so bad.
Yeah.
And, like, he said in interviews that, like, it sucks so bad he wouldn't be able to, like, do it again.
Yeah.
But at the same time... He loved it.
He absolutely loved it.
He loved being Gimli.
And he was perfect Gimli.
He was a perfect Gimli.
Which also we are introduced to Legolas, who is portrayed by the heartthrob Orlando Bloom in his first role outside of school. And
we now have the true original divide. It wasn't Team Jacob and Team Edward originally. It was Team Legolas and Team Aragorn.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And also,
nobody liked Gimli, poor guy.
Yeah, so I'm sure someone liked Gimli.
There is, I'm sure, one person, but they didn't have their own, like, they didn't have banners and posters.
Gimli, if this was released nowadays...
After The Hobbit came out, now Gimli would have a fan club.
No, before Gimli, with all the Viking Revolution and shit.
Yes.
Yeah. the rebirth of the love for Vikings and whatnot.
I think Gimli now would have a fan base, but back then...
No.
Poor guy didn't have anything. And Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin got nothing.
No.
They were barely looked at, poor guys. And then
Frodo was a heartthrob in this.
To an extent, and there was a handful of people who liked the, like, Labrador-esque energy of Sam.
Yeah. Yeah.
Merry and Pippin were given the same status as, like, cute best friends.
Yeah.
Looking back, plenty of people have been Fred and George Weasley'd hard enough. They're like, yes, that's my type. But back then, they weren't options. You couldn't have posters of those two. You could only have posters of Legolas or Aragorn.
Yeah.
Those were your options. And they weren't even very good pictures of either of them.
And so there are some things I want to talk about in this meeting. I love that Aragorn, the way they said it, he's cautiously looking at Boromir the whole time. Because Aragorn knows that if Boromir gets the ring...
It's over.
Yeah. There's no hope.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that shows that Aragorn's not trustful of himself either.
No.
Because he knows that he carries the evil in men, the generational evil.
Yeah. And, like, he knows he could go claim the throne of Gondor and siege war against Mordor.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that doesn't sound like a great idea.
But I also like in this part because we get this reoccurrence of Gandalf being dark. Like they're all squabbling over it, and Gandalf, like, gets all...
Yes, I love how all the elves in the background are like, God damn it, Gandalf, not again.
Yeah. Well, and he's... dude. Elrond specifically. Because there's some parts where there's, like, little nods and winks between each other of, like... I think it feels very much so like they had an agenda, and they were trying to get it, and they just wanted to see if everyone else was on board.
Yes, very much.
I'm just going to throw out this idea.
Has anyone else considered?
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean... I also feel for Boromir because he is justified in that his family's on the front lines. Boromir's been on the front lines.
Yeah, Boromir's been at war since he could pick up a sword.
And I know he gives Aragorn shit of, like, who is, and he doesn't even know his lineage. He's like, he's just some ranger from the north. Why the hell is he even here? And then Legolas chimes in of, like, he is the son. He is your king.
And Aragorn gets to go, Legolas, you dumbass. This is why your father kicked you out.
Yeah, like, dude, calm the fuck down a little bit.
Shut up. We've talked about this.
But, Boromir is justified. He is the one. But,
there's a lot of actions that especially knowing all of the stuff from the second movie.
Yeah.
That you're like, okay, did Boromir stray? Yes. But was Boromir also, like, very much the pressured first son who was, like, trying to be perfect for his father who was an ass?
Yeah.
The biggest of dicks? Like... Yeah, kid didn't have a great chance to begin with.
No, not at all.
No.
His dad's a dick. His
father is the dick.
I saw someone put something in of, like, the reason Lord of the Rings is so good is that all the men are good. And it's like... No, they're not.
Most of them have terrible flaws.
No, a lot of them are actually kind of assholes.
Yes.
Like...
Until about the third movie, and then we can be like, all right, you have redeemed some assholes.
Yeah, everyone has.
Well, no. Some of them are still assholes.
To a point, yeah.
One of them burns his son.
And in the last moment is repentive.
As he leaps off a cliff.
His redemption is
Fuck
killing
him.
himself. Yes. But they decide who will destroy the ring or who shall take... Or they decide to destroy the ring after Gimli's like, I'll just break it with my axe.
I appreciate Gimli's go-hungness.
But it breaks, but they're like, who should take it? Which... I love the casual racism in this movie between the races.
Too.
Especially the elves, because even the elves hate other elves.
I appreciate that the dwarves are blatantly racist.
Yeah.
And the elves are over here being like, none of you are good enough.
Yeah. And this all stems from, and I brought it up earlier, their different creation story.
It's a long, deep path that I like that all three movies tow around quite heavily.
Yeah. Well, and also... So, past that part, what it also shows in these brief moments is that Frodo is already deeply tied to the ring.
Yeah. He grew up around it, too. Like, it was in Bilbo's home the whole time.
But
he wasn't actually carrying it, but, like, surely you can't just, like, be breathing that ring air.
Well, that's the thing, is that it doesn't seem like the ring, until the ring wants you to have it, it doesn't feel like it can go unabated. Like, it can be completely ignored. It doesn't want to be touched. It doesn't want to be noticed until the time is right.
Yes, does seem like that.
So I feel Frodo probably could have gotten away with it not ever being tempted by it until now that he's actually carried it, and the ring's like, you guys are trying to destroy me? What? I wasn't told this.
I don't want to do that. I want to be carried around by the small one.
Where was my memo, guys? This is what
this meeting's about?
This feels like an important decision that I should have been a part of, guys.
I just came here to have a good time, and I'm honestly feeling pretty attacked right now.
Yeah. But, I mean, it also... It's just... The Hobbits are important because... And I think that's why Gandalf really brought him in. Is because there's warmongering between the races that the Hobbits are not a part of.
Yeah.
And so they're the bipartial member who's like, we just want to keep our peace, man.
We just don't want to die.
Yeah, exactly.
We prefer not death.
But Bilbo also mentions that the Hobbits only desire peace, so it's also up to them to calm the chaos of others.
A well-spoken thought.
Yes. Also... I can't say enough. Jackson did a great job of condensing such a long goddamn chapter into a short time frame.
So good.
But again, this was an hour and a half. An hour and a half of just a meeting. Yes. A meeting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just hanging out, talking about stuff.
Yeah. And so from this, the Fellowship of the Rings is formed, and we end on a little bit of comedy with Pippin.
Dear sweet Pippin.
Yeah. Also, John Rhys Davies was the perfect pick because design-wise, he's about the right height of him standing over the hobbits.
Yes. To
have only one composite shot, rather than having to composite him over the humans, to composite the hobbits over him.
Worked out really well.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's...
Part one.
Part one. I mean, we're going to continue this. I don't know how to end this episode.
I don't either.
So yeah.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah, check. This has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Thanks for listening.
Peace, and we'll see you in part 2 next week.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be fun. We'll talk a little bit more about the legacy.
Yes.
Just a little bit, because I kind of want to save that for the very end, because...
I agree, because these things came out back to back.
Yeah, and it really is one giant story. So.
It really is. Nobody watches just one.
Yeah. No, not at all. But see you in a bit. Peace.